Her drooping head and confused look indicated that she was hardly happy to meet. But now the Archduke was saying that they should have met long ago. In the semi-darkness of the shadows, the man and woman seemed like an ordinary married couple, calmly discussing pressing issues. But the reality was different. The blond man, dressed in a silver-embroidered waistcoat and with a luxurious brooch on his neck scarf, inlaid with a huge ruby, was clearly displeased. The silver-haired man, haughtily closing his eyes, said that he had been expecting his wife a week ago, but she had not come. And now, looking at Ines with eyes the color of grass, gently warmed by the first spring sun, he did not understand why the woman did not follow the order. And she, openly looking at the man with bottomless blue eyes, said that she had been ill for a long time, and even now she does not feel better. But the young man, sprawled in his chair, thought that the girl was making excuses again. There was something arrogant in his indifference. Looking down, the beauty already noticed the cold gaze of her husband, who was not at all bored. But they really hadn't seen each other for too long, she thought. In the sunset light, she again noticed his perfect features and impeccably styled hair. It was easy to fall in love with him, but it was dangerous to love. And the brunette had never seen such eyes. The color of green that does not bend under the winds, changing depending on the time of day. One could say that he was perfect. And there were even times when the beautiful woman thought that she could lean on him. However, her memory, like a fluttering butterfly, already transported her back 6 years, when the young beauty was sold to his state. She was supposed to be the crown prince, but she became the wife of another. Their perfect wedding, illuminated by a scattering of fireworks, looked elegant and romantic. A refined brunette, with a delicate bouquet in her hands, and a tall blonde man in a raincoat, moving through the flow of people, did not attract the attention of the public at all. Looking at his ideal bride, he thought that their marriage would help in the unification of the two states. After all, Ines was a member of the imperial family of Geneva. But the Archduke of the Lycan Empire, Ryan, thinking about his less-than-ideal marriage, realized that he was like an apple, beautiful and fragrant on the outside, but rotten on the inside. After all, if you look reality in the eye, then the girl he got as a bride was absolutely not the one the young man dreamed of. He understood that a rotten marriage would not bear quality fruit, but he had no choice, because Ryan, like his bride, was a hostage to circumstances. It seemed that the bride was gentle and wonderfully beautiful, but there was one unpleasant circumstance. She was the illegitimate daughter of one of the princesses of Geneva. The girl born from a forbidden relationship was a disgrace to the family. Having tarnished the reputation of the imperial family, it was subjected to ridicule and condemnation by the nobility. And even when the most powerful man of the Archduchy, Ryan, accepted her into his family, the man's pride cracked. He was cold to her. Although she, having a wonderful character, was caressed by the servants and lived quietly in her new family. She was beautiful and well-mannered, and her luxurious chocolate-colored hair perfectly matched her violet eyes, emphasizing her breed. Watching his wife from the window, he noticed more and more often that he wanted to possess her, and this irritated him. Her cheerful disposition both attracted and repelled the blonde. After all, the man was haunted by the thought that his wife was unworthy of his attention. Thinking about how to trample her feelings, he wanted the girl to be unhappy. But Ines, unaware of his terrible intentions, was already giving in to her husband's desires. But over time, she realized that there was no place for her in her husband's life. She was not at all surprised by this attitude, being aware of her position. But the Archduke treated his son Caesar in the same way. A wonderful boy, deprived of his father's love, practically did not see him. Unlike his mother, who took all the care of the baby upon herself, amazed and afraid of his resemblance to his father, she loved her son madly, trying not to let strangers near him. Tearing his emerald eyes away, he glanced at his mother, warming her heart with love. Smiling back at him, Ines knew that he was needed only by her. And now, sitting in his office and looking with hope at the man who could possibly be a good father, unlike her husband, she asked to visit her son. He crossed his legs, reminding her that she was too persistent in her requests, and he even got irritated by his wife's insistence. But he still did not rule out that he would do it in the near future. However, the disappointed mother no longer believed in words. Crumpling her dress and terribly worried, she asked to do it today because it was already the 3rd week since the Archduke had seen his son. But the rather busy man, who clearly did not pay attention to this and had lost track of time, was clearly surprised. And Inessa already categorically demanded that the man come and hug his child at least once. Ryan's distant look told her he wouldn't do it, and she looked down, knowing she was wrong again. But her gaze had already fallen on the tray with the tea set, or rather, on the cold tea in the cup, which was clearly intended for her. She had known for a long time that he had poisoned her. And now, holding the cup with shaking hands, she noted the characteristic aroma of the drink. After all, every time after meeting with the Archduke, she had to undergo a procedure to cleanse her body. And the doctor who carried out the detoxification openly told her that her health was too undermined, and he was angry that she called him so late. The weakening girl understood that she didn't have much time left, but she was still generous to those who did this to her. Ill-wishers, noticing the changes in her and constantly collecting gossip, offended the fading Inez, and she only thought that they knew nothing. Looking at her reflection in the cup, the girl understood that being a thorn in the side of this family, her existence was an insult to their pride. She felt their hatred, knowing that they wanted to pull out the unnecessary splinter in her face. But only one question remained open: their little son. And so she hurried to ask her husband to love and protect Caesar, and also dress the boy in decent clothes and put him to bed in a cozy room. Holding the cup in her hands and lowering her eyes, Ines begged the Archduke to be a caring father, not leaving his son unattended. She dreamed that he would grow up to be a worthy person, even without her. After all, in 10 or maybe 20 years, he would not remember his mother, because he was too young. And in the future, she will become a support for her father and continue the noble line, because the man had no other heirs. But throwing his head back, the man was surprised that his wife was saying obvious things. After all, they couldn't do otherwise with a descendant of the Aleno family. However, the young mother, not calming down, insisted on her own. After all, he did not know what kind of looks the people around them gave them, but the Archduke was just as heartless and selfish as the rest of them. A rotten apple, no less. A man who waited for his wife to disappear. The agitated woman could hardly catch her breath. He, seeing that she was ill, promised to do as his wife asked, and she, hardly believing, did not stop asking for a son. After all, only in this way could Ines calmly leave this world. Interrupting his wife, he offered to end the pointless conversation. He wanted to voice the reason why he invited her here, but the girl interrupted him again. She insistently demanded to continue the conversation about her son, because she saw that she had not reached her husband's feelings, and now Ines tried to find the words. Gathering the rest of her strength and unable to think of anything better, she already said that she hated him. The Archduke was dumbfounded for a moment, thinking that he had misheard, but she repeated the words about hatred again. She tried to explain why she had such feelings for her husband. After all, she often remembered the day when she first saw the man. Now the brunette was asking him why the man had extended his hand to her, giving her hope when she first appeared in the palace. Humiliated and crushed, Ines looked at the handsome blonde and, giving him her hand, dissolved in his eyes. He was gentle and made a girl who had never experienced deep feelings before fall in love with him. But after some time, standing on the balcony, the brunette thought that the man was simply using her. He did not even give her the opportunity to leave him. He looked at her as if she were a stranger. The feelings that had once flared up had long since passed, and the emptiness that had replaced them had grown into irritation. The girl burst into tears, unable to contain her emotions. Through the stream of tears, she said that she hated herself even more for being so stupid. But he seemed to have no reaction to his wife's revelations. Moreover, he even laughed nervously. The Archduke stood up without looking at the girl, but she noticed that her husband's face had changed. It seemed that Ines's words had hurt him, and the next moment the man was already approaching her. But the woman didn't care, because she hadn't loved him for a long time. Holding his wife by the chin, he asked her how angry she was with him. Stroking his dull hair, the Archduke looked into his amazing eyes, which were dulled by illness. He hugged his wife and remained silent, while she only thought about the fact that she knew about his awakening tenderness, which she mistakenly took for love. But suddenly, having moved away, he was already reproaching his wife for pestering him, and he advised her not to provoke him, because nothing good would come of it. It sounded funny, and now she only regretted that this cruel and arrogant man was the father of her beautiful son. Still clutching the cup in her hands, she thought about what his face would be like if she died in this chair. But the man watching her most likely liked it when the girl was in pain. Slowly raising the cup to her lips, she said goodbye to life. The best moments of her life and her son flashed in her head, like love and pain at the same time. And the man standing next to her understood that when his wife was gone, he would be free. And he would no longer have to experience the shame that weighed on him. The girl's strength was leaving her. Throwing her head back, Inez sighed heavily. Her strange and sad fate was being interrupted. The cup, slipping from her graceful fingers, shattered into porcelain shards on the floor. The last breath that escaped the brunette's lips quietly broke the connection with this world. The trickle of blood slowly flowing from her mouth left no hope for life. Her body, tormented by the poison, was giving in, unable to fight any longer. The bleeding that had opened up flowing down her dress deprived Inez of any hope of salvation. The Archduke froze in surprise, and then he continued calling her for a long time, shaking her by the shoulders. Stroking his wife's pale cheeks, he asked her never to cross paths with him again, even in the next life. He looked broken, screaming in despair, pain and weakness. And that was all Inez saw in the fading reality, and his green eyes so familiar and beloved reminding of his son. And now they were trembling. And 6 years ago, the emperor's entourage, outraged by the demands of the Geneva family to make a member of their family the bride of the crown prince, were already gathering for a meeting. And the emperor himself, propping his face up with his hand and looking at his beloved offspring, did not understand how they dared to come up with such a proposal. The count, who had entered the conversation, insisted on cutting off the ambassador's head and sending it back to where he had come from. After all, they should not have given in to various tricks. However, Lord Arlen, addressing the speaker, asked not to react so emotionally. But the count, not retreating, considered such a proposal humiliating for them. The situation required a solution. After all, only together could we accept the absurd demand of the enemy state or, having rejected it, resist. But there was one circumstance that did not allow to refuse. After all, the Empire of Lycaon, at the end of the 7-Year War, lost to the Holy Empire of Geneva, and the enemy accepted the emperor's request for a temporary truce, but on one condition. In return, he found a way to bring the defeated state to its knees by offering to arrange a marriage between Inez and the Crown Prince of Lycaon. But one of the advisors was already rushing to clarify that the girl, who did not even have a last name, was the illegitimate daughter of one of the princesses of the imperial family. And the emperor, realizing that he could no longer sacrifice the treasury and the young men of the empire, already knew that he would have to sign the treaty. The count who took the floor doubted that everything would be resolved so simply. He was almost certain that all enemy actions would be aimed at capturing Lycaon. Covering his eyes with his hands, the emperor thought about the fact that he would have to sacrifice the happiness of his beloved son. Realizing that this was cruel, he saw no other choice. And now, looking across the table at Archduke Eleno, his nephew, he understood that this was not the fate he had wished for his only heir. And Ryan, who had distanced himself from the crowd, was thinking. He understood that he would most likely not pass over the fate of the man who would save Lycaon. However, a decision had to be made, and the crown prince had already asked his brother what he thought about this event. The count, who turned towards him and supported the crown prince, also asked the archduke to express his opinion. But the young man, reluctantly opening his mouth, was in no hurry to answer. Folding his arms across his chest, it seemed that he did not want to talk about this topic at all. However, the next moment he still squeezed out that he saw this event as a small-scale Cold War, and the king, having switched to his nephew, already understood that he could offer him as a match for Inez. After all, they wanted to get a noble man who shines like the sun. But nowhere was it written that this tame beast should be the crown prince. After all, it wasn't only his son who could lay claim to the throne. At that moment, the father was thinking about it, practically making the decision about marriage. And the one sitting opposite him was the master of Lycaon in the north, and the wide wasteland in the west. After all, he was the ruler of the Archduchy of Eleno, strong and brave, the war hero and second contender for the imperial throne. He was cunning and strong in spirit enough, which could not be said about the king's son. And the fact that the enemy was unable to enter the capital was solely his merit. The emperor realized that the moment might soon come when Eleno would be a more threatening adversary than the state of Geneva. And now the crown prince, realizing that he might have the opportunity to tame his brother, hastened to ask him to conclude this strange alliance. But the blonde man himself wanted to suggest this. And now he was talking about how he was ready to accept a member of the imperial family of Geneva as his wife. But the emperor still doubted that Ryan would cope, and the girl would choose him. He understood that there had to be someone who would direct her attention towards the archduke. But this was unnecessary and of no importance. the Archduke assured, looking at the surprised emperor. His cold mind again surprised his worried uncle and brother. But they wanted to know the way he was going to act. But interrupting the Archduke, the short, fat man sitting at the table was already proposing the best of the options, believing that there was nothing complicated about this. After all, Ryan had a beautiful and cozy mansion, a huge number of servants and excellent food, and a spoiled girl would like all this, he added. But the emperor, interrupting him, hastened to say that in Lycan there is the same thing, and material goods most likely cannot become a criterion for her choice. The blond man who was watching the discussion remained silent, but his mind was working non-stop. Every word that was said was analyzed by his consciousness. Nervously tapping his fingers on the tabletop, Ryan searched feverishly for the one perfectly crafted argument. But suddenly a smile lit up the Archduke's face. Looking up at those present, he said in a confident and calm voice that he had a plan. He spoke with ease as he spoke, as if it had all been obvious from the start. And as the fat man had already noted, there really was nothing complicated about it. He decided to tell the girl that she would be treated as a human being. Knowing how illegitimate children were treated, he had no doubt that he would succeed. Knowing that Ryan was strong in psychology and analytics, the Crown Prince looked at him with gratitude, never ceasing to be amazed at his brother's abilities. And he, getting into a frenzy and waving his arms, was already talking about why it would be much better in Eleno than it was in Geneva, and not like in Lycan. A little nervously, he claimed that he would convince the girl of his love and show her that here she could be looked at without contempt. Then she really bought it, the Archduke finished, and his eyes, having flashed a green fire, went out. It was cruel, thought the fat man in the green vest, even towards a guest from an enemy empire. However, the Count, worried about the circumstances of this event, clarified how everything would be in order. And although the Archduchy of Eleno enjoyed authority, there was still one incident from 10 years ago that reminded us of itself, and the memory, already returning Ryan to the day when his parents died. After all, looking at his uncle with a sword in his hands, standing in front of their bodies, he did not understand everything. The teenager, his eyes wide open, tried to address his parents one by one, but could not find the words. But realizing that they were dead, his gaze returned to his uncle. Looking in confusion at the man who would later become emperor, the teenager realized that it was he who had killed his parents. The blood-stained shirt frightened Ryan, and the future emperor, looking away, was afraid to look into his nephew's eyes. But in the evening he realized that his uncle, whom he followed more than his father, had betrayed his family, and later accused his nephew of murdering his parents. But now, with his eyes downcast, the Archduke was already saying that he did not mix personal feelings and work. He crossed his arms in front of him and thoughtfully said that he was not going to do anything that could harm him. The cheerful emperor was already in a hurry to ask his nephew what he would like as a reward for his invaluable service. But without raising his eyes, Ryan said that he agreed to receive the Gelnoa plain, because the land there was quite fertile, and the young man knew about it. The seemingly generous reward was fair compensation for the illegitimate child of a hostile state. The uncle summed up after thinking about it. The treaty with the state of Geneva was signed, and the emperor had already confirmed his signature with his personal seal. The Archduke closed his eyes and was glad that the meeting had not been too drawn out, since he could not tolerate empty chatter. The emperor, looking at his nephew, insisted that he change the girl's decision regarding her partner as soon as possible, and Ryan only shook his head in agreement. Now His Majesty was thinking that the blonde would keep his promise, because his opponent was just a weak woman. The meeting was over and everyone was leaving, but Ryan could not stop hearing the voice of the Crown Prince, who wanted to talk. He wanted to make sure that everything said earlier about the prospective bride was not true. The Archduke did not understand the reason for the conversation, and he, promising that everything would remain between them, asked to speak more simply and without conventions. But as it turned out later, he was worried about the fate of Geneva's illegitimate daughter, and he was also hooked by Ryan's words that he would love her. What significance this had and why it was important for Richard, the blonde did not understand. Having taken a step towards his brother, he was already talking about how he did as the emperor wanted. He hoped that everyone was satisfied and the matter was resolved. After all, he saw that the Crown Prince was not inclined to accept the girl as his bride. Leaning forward a little, the heir to the throne felt that his brother was being disingenuous, but he was afraid to ask for details. He knew Ryan and frankly was afraid of him. After all, there was a harshness and coldness in his character, behind which something dangerous was hidden. Perhaps because of this, It was not so difficult for them to assume each other's sincere intentions. And now, looking at the Archduke, the brother was angry, clenching his fists, because he knew for sure that he would not treat the illegitimate child as a human being. Moreover, Richard reasoned to himself, it was completely clear that the girl's fate was predetermined. But the Crown Prince was only repeating what he had said at the meeting. He wanted the illegitimate child to be treated at least humanely. He was still trying to reach his brother, but he apparently was completely indifferent to the fate of a woman from an enemy state. However, Richard did not give up. Accusing Ryan of deception, he tried to get the Archduke to talk, but the blonde only waved him off. Did her brother really think that Ryan would take her to the dungeons of the Imperial Palace and force her to love him? It was ridiculous. The cunning commander understood that this goal could be achieved differently. The blonde would make the girl fall in love and believe that it was her own choice. Moving to the sound of his cloak, he said that for the illegitimate girl this would be enough, if she did not claim the role of ex-duchess. But the Crown Prince was not satisfied with his explanations. He reminded the blonde that they had already met many years ago in Genio. It was strange that his brother had forgotten about it, Richard wondered. After all, they had taken part in a masquerade ball in the Imperial Fortress, he recalled. The man turned around and thought about it, but his memory was already transporting him to the luxurious halls where he and his brother had been invited that night. He remembered that among the hundreds of guests his gaze had caught on a beautiful brunette, whose attention was also riveted on him. And he was surprised that his brother remembered this. However, Richard had already reminded him that the girl was charming and sweet. But interrupting the Crown Prince, Ryan did not understand what he was getting at. Did his brother really think that he would abuse her? The Archduke asked calmly. Looking at the image of the brunette reminded him that his emotional side was not developed at all, and it was extremely imprudent to expect such actions from him. He didn't care at all what she looked like. Having no feelings for her, he was simply going to do his duty. And now Ryan was saying that if the girl behaved modestly, she would be able to live peacefully somewhere in the distant rooms of the mansion. At that moment, the Archduke did not want to think about her at all. After all, it was a simple formality. But suddenly his gaze fell on the signature at the bottom of the painting. Usually artists did that. But now the name Ines was there. Covering himself with his cloak, he thought. After all, he learned the name of his future wife for the first time. But if the Archduke knew what mission was entrusted to the girl, and Ines, who had arrived, sitting on the cold stove and listening to the horse's clopping feet, could not yet come to her senses. She did not understand what else those terrible people had come up with. A nervous woman in a purple dress demanded that she try to look smart, and also not forget what she was taught. Rising from the tile, Ines understood what the lady was talking about. But knowing that it smelled bad and the dirty hair and dress completed the horrible picture, she shrank from shame. The woman, who had seen a lot, jumped back and realized that she had been treated rather cruelly. And it was obvious that the girl had not washed for a long time and was clearly starving. But in spite of everything, she did not shed a single tear when she was thrown out of the mail coach onto the stone slabs, the lady silently reasoned. Carelessly pointing her finger at the man, she reminded him that Lucifer would be accompanying her, and she demanded that the Emperor Genevo's order be repeated. In a quiet voice, the girl was already saying that she had been ordered to accept a noble man as her husband and make him admit his insignificance. She folded her arms across her chest, not wanting to waste any more time. And the man, roughly grabbing her hand, was already in a hurry to take the brunette to the mansion. But suddenly black smoke, rising up the dirty dress of the unfortunate girl, gently and tightly enveloped her body and arms. Preventing the beauty from moving, the creature of darkness was ready to speak. After all these difficult days he was next to her, and saw what the brunette had to endure. Sitting down on her fragile body, he was already asking the girl how well she was. But Ines answered with gratitude. It had been worse. He was so angry that he wanted to kill everyone, because he felt how much pain the beautiful girl was in. With her head down, the tired beauty asked not to do this, because she herself could get hurt. She had known him for a long time. After all, trying to protect Ines, he sucked the last of her strength, considering the girl a donor. Following Lucifer, the brunette did not know what was waiting for her ahead, but she was glad that she got to Lycany. After all, it seemed to the girl that the road would never end. She asked Keon, her faithful friend, to hide, because someone might suspect his existence and then she would be declared a witch. Touching the beauty's heart, he evaporated, and the girl, closing her eyes, sighed with relief. Moving quite quickly and looking around, The brunette was amazed by the luxury of the imperial palace. The luxurious mansion with terracotta towers struck with its beauty and grandeur. After all, it was much more elegant and atmospheric than the Palace of Geneva. It took her breath away, because in some places in the Lycan Palace one could feel the grandeur of a 1,000-year history that could not be underestimated. But as she moved through the corridors of the castle, Inés was sure that she would only be able to visit 2 places in it: the prison, or the largest and most radiant hall in the palace. And the obsessive words flowing from the walls of Geneva were already knocking on her ears. And even having closed them, she heard monstrous orders. After all, Inés had to do everything to ensure that the Lycan imperial family was rotten to the core, and also give birth to a child to destroy them. Believing that all men are the same and no one can resist a persistent and skilled woman, they stopped at nothing. Not wanting to engage in such vulgar things, her feminine side went on strike. After all, seducing a man and giving birth to an unwanted child who would destroy an entire empire sounded disgusting. Now she was thinking about escaping. She could do so by borrowing Kian's power. But she didn't understand what to do next. The further she went, the more thoughts were in her head. She just wanted to live despite the difficult circumstances. But the knight who had come up was already roughly grabbing the girl by the chin. Looking into the brunette's eyes, he was causing her pain. But Inés, closing her eyes, endured. Calling her dirty and nasty, the knight was angry. After all, he thought that she was sent in such a state on purpose. But a calm voice was already advising the man to watch his words. Having let go of the girl, he already heard Lucifer declaring that the brunette would rise to the most noble place in this empire. And the creature of darkness, hurrying to help his favorite, was already climbing up her dress. But now she could not allow his appearance. But before Inés could utter a word, an unknown hand softly and tenderly touched her elbow. The man who appeared behind her, lightly hugging and pressing her to himself, had already promised to take her further. Turning around, she saw Ryan. Looking at the girl with emerald eyes, he looked at her tenderly. Looking at the young man, Inés suddenly remembered that she had already seen him in her short life. His steel-colored hair was eye-catching, and his elegant look with a luxurious brooch on his neck scarf emphasized his elegance. Putting his hand to his chest, the knight hurried to greet his majesty, not expecting him to come so quickly. Hearing the address to the approaching Inés thought about it. After all, she understood that only one person in Lycan was called that. She had never seen his face, but she dreamed of doing so at least once. The confused knight became nervous, and the Archduke, looking at his subordinate in surprise, was already asking about the order he was supposed to receive. Pressing the girl to himself, he calmly reminded him that he had given the order to immediately deliver her to Eleno's room, and the Archduke did not understand why it was not carried out. Judging by his appearance, the knight really knew nothing. After all, disobeying a man who was feared more than Emperor Lycan was life-threatening. The first knight and rightful heir to the imperial throne, closing his eyes, was clearly displeased and looking at the sad knight, made it clear that he would be punished. But keeping his composure and not wanting to frighten Inés, he was already saying that he would take the girl himself. Knowing the Archduke's character, he was already stepping aside. Looking carefully at Ryan, Inés heard him quietly, but with some special accent, asking the knight to repeat the order. She shuddered as if the heir had addressed her. Now she knew for sure that it was Archduke Eleno in front of her. After all, several months ago, she studied the personal data of the aristocrats of Lycan and saw a portrait of a man. But it did not convey any details at all. And now Ryan surprised her even more. Extending his hand, he greeted the brunette in Lycan and asked for forgiveness for her inappropriate attitude. He was genuinely glad she had arrived. At least it was written on his face. And he held her hand for a long time as if he didn't want to ruin this fragile moment. Suddenly closing his eyes, he leaned smoothly and touched her hand with his lips. A light but noticeable kiss made the girl shudder. Accustomed since childhood to neglect and complete condemnation, she did not expect tenderness, but suddenly received it, awakening an unusual excitement in her heart. The blushing girl was confused, but quickly pulled herself together and was already in a hurry to thank the young man. But she noticed a cold look in his eyes. Inés crossed her arms over her chest and felt strangely uneasy. There were too many contradictions in his words and actions. They were silent as they walked along the long corridors of the castle. But after a while he spoke. His voice was flat and indifferent, and there was no interest in his words. However, the Archduke heard that the road to Lycany was quite difficult for her. She was modest, but her appearance said it all. Inez thanked the man for his concern but asked him not to worry. Walking through the corridors, he asked her to devote time to rest, because before the welcoming ceremony, this castle would become the girl's home. She was amazed by the luxury surrounding her, from the crystal chandeliers to the rare unique items placed everywhere, and the imposing man was beyond praise. But her innate mind did not yet understand why he treated her so reverently. After all, while they were standing on different sides of this life, a self-sufficient man and a dirty girl, as if living her life on the street. But she couldn't imagine anything better with her background. Looking down, Inez worried that Ryan would look at her the same way everyone else did. Catching up with the Archduke, she thought for a moment that perhaps she would have to seduce him. But now she was in a hurry to ask about something else. And the Archduke, listening and realizing that Inez was lagging behind and not following him, did not understand what the problem was. But she already reminded him that they had met before. After all, she wanted the man to be a little more lenient towards her. And Ryan, amazed by the girl's weak character, began to get upset. But this was a deceptive feeling because behind her apparent ease there was pain. But smiling, Inez continued to talk about how perhaps only she remembers their meeting. However, the next moment, lowering her head, she reminded Ryan that if he had forgotten, the girl would not talk about it anymore. And the Archduke continued to examine the brunette. He did not understand why he was doing this, but one thing was clear: Inez was absolutely not suited for this place. Her pinched shoulders and dirty dress were unpleasant to the man, as was her loose, dark chocolate-colored hair, with no obvious signs of a haircut. There was nothing in it that could be looked at with admiration, the Archduke thought, squinting. The eyes of an aesthete were upset by such a sad sight, and the servants, like the wind, were spreading the news about the ugly woman who had arrived at the mansion. After all, they had never seen anything like it. Huddled in a corner and looking at the girl, they whispered and laughed. Their looks were full of mockery, and their smiles were full of poisonous malice. Passing by the servants, Inez heard words filled with contempt. And now she understood that her whole future life could turn into a fight against gossip. And the Archduke, noticing with what curiosity the maids were watching what was happening, was already casting an icy glance at them and demanding that they observe propriety. But Inez, looking at the man, thought only that one could only dream of such an enviable match as the Archduke. Perhaps they would meet again someday, but under more favorable circumstances. But suddenly he gently put his hand on her shoulder. Feeling that the girl was trembling, Ryan, without thinking, threw his waistcoat over her. It seemed as if the world had stopped. No one had ever cared for her like that. Inez interpreted his actions completely differently, because she wanted to love and be loved. Looking into the girl's eyes, the man asked her to remember whether he had said that Inez looked too small and naive. She blushed and smiled. Inez couldn't even imagine that he remembered that conversation at the ball. It was incredible. The emotions that overwhelmed the brunette were impossible to describe. Her chest filled with a sweet tremor, and a warm, almost childish smile played on her lips. The conversation during the ball had unexpectedly helped him to win Inez over. It was a good start, the Archduke thought, because he wanted to lull her vigilance. She spoke shyly about how she wanted to apologize for not recognizing him right away. But it wasn't easy, because the white mask practically covered her entire face. But Ryan didn't think there was any need to apologize. He continued to look at the brunette, not knowing what to latch on to. It was obvious that she hadn't had it easy her whole life, and that's why she tried to please him. Apparently, Inez thought that the intersections in their destinies could play into her hands. Not knowing what else to say, the girl sadly hung her head, and the Archduke, not understanding how much longer he would waste time, suggested going further. Her face lit up. The tired beauty smiled, and Ryan only noted once again to himself that she was completely unsuitable for this place. Standing on the red carpet, illuminated by the crystal chandelier and expertly arranged gauze curtains, she held her breath. But Inez didn't know she would live here. Everything the girl saw inside dazzled and amazed her. Exquisite furniture and beautiful fabrics created coziness, and flowers in vases filled the room with aroma. But to all the splendor there were also servants who were at her disposal, the Archduke reminded. Moreover, they could also be flogged if they did something wrong. Looking at the man, she already saw how his speech had changed. After all, he was speaking firmly and too formally again. And now it scared her. Inez sighed heavily, because the distance that seemed to have shortened between them suddenly increased again. Standing surrounded by the servants who had already arrived, she heard him clearly giving them orders. and her man asked her to take a bath immediately and eat well. Not quite understanding what was going on, Ines was already asking if she was really going to live here, to which the Archduke only noted that he had already spoken about this. But apparently the brunette was so worried that she completely missed it. And now she was afraid that the Archduke would consider her stupid and inattentive. Looking around, she didn't know what to think, but her brain refused to believe in such a fairy tale. A luxurious room, a new life, servants. Ines couldn't even dream of such a thing. But suddenly remembering his words about her being able to beat the servants, the girl shuddered. After all, it could rather apply to her. Of course, she didn't want to be put in prison, but she also didn't know what to do with this wonderful life. But suddenly, raising her hand to her mouth and looking at the Archduke with frightened eyes, she was already saying that this place was too magnificent for her. And without thinking twice, she asked to be given a more modest and smaller room. But Ryan had no intention of changing his mind. The Archduke insisted that this was the place for her. However, a man with a short haircut entering the room said that the Elenos do not treat guests differently. As Lucifer entered the room, he noted that this was a worthy place for the future wife of the crown prince, and he thanked the Archduke for his hospitality. A silent question froze in Ryan's eyes, but not wanting to figure it all out yet, he hurried out of the room. Having wished Ines a pleasant evening, he still hoped that after she was tidied up, she would at least not smell bad. Turning around, he left the room. But suddenly an unexpected touch to his hand pierced his body with electricity. The Archduke stopped abruptly. He had not yet seen her face, but the tension emanating from the girl was almost tangible. Turning around, the man glanced at her briefly, trying to figure out what had her so worried. She was shaking, and although it was barely noticeable, Ryan saw it. But the next moment, Ines was overcome with panic. It seemed that she was going crazy, because she had no right to behave so insolently with the Archduke. But it was even more frightening to stay with Lucifer. The very thought of it paralyzed the brunette with horror and despair. But the very next moment, pressing her hands to her chest, Ines was already apologizing, still hoping that the Archduke would stay a little longer. This was not his plan at all. The mock greeting had already lasted too long, so the man thought that was enough for today. Suddenly, Lucifer noticed that it seemed Lycan was stingy with the money for the imperial palace. After all, Ines's companion had not noticed any precious stones or tiles. This provocation instantly changed the Archduke's mood, drawing his gaze to Lucifer. And he, provoking Ryan and maintaining a cheeky grin, tested the patience of his interlocutor, enjoying every moment of this tense silence. But soon the blonde spoke up. Ryan's piercing gaze made it clear that the boundaries of what was permitted had already been crossed and that he was in trouble. Without thinking, the blonde asked what room the man had settled in. But the answer surprised the Archduke. After all, when he answered that he was Ines's bodyguard, he was going to stay next to the girl. But the Archduke suddenly realized that this was what scared the brunette. But now Ryan was in control, and there was a hidden threat in every look he gave. The question of Lucifer's possible spying in the palace hung in the air. By closing the door to Ines's room, the Archduke hinted that they needed to talk. He squinted his eyes and said that he doubted that he was a bodyguard. And he hurried to warn that if the man dared to do anything, death awaited him. And Lucifer was now thinking that if Ines messed up the matter, he intended to kill her immediately. That's why the girl, knowing about this, was shaking so much. And while she was being watched, he saw that she would most likely choose the Archduke. But now, worried, he told Ryan that he had arrived as a member of the delegation, and therefore was the face of the Genevan Empire. But the Archduke was already getting worked up. However, Lucifer did not know then that by telling the Archduke what to do, he could lose his life. Therefore, he continued to talk without stopping about how the Archduke had attacked the wrong person, thereby signing his own death warrant. After all, Ryan was called the Demon of the West, and legends were made about his cruelty and cunning. But what he had in mind now was impossible to implement. Brandishing his jewel-encrusted sword, Ryan didn't care why he had come from Geneva. But now Lucifer was ruining his plans. And the very next moment, he struck the bodyguard in the back with a sharp blow of the weapon handle. The man collapsed on the tiles and lost consciousness. Ryan asked to remove his body by locking it in one of the rooms. He turned around and left. He thought that he needed Lucifer alive, at least until Ines chose a husband for herself. And the beautiful girl, I feel happy, had been living in an unfamiliar room with a servant for several days. And she really liked the quiet life. The days flew by so quickly that she lost count of them. Rested and incredibly beautiful, She seemed to have completely forgotten why she had come here. The feeling of safety did not leave Inés. Having escaped from hell, she enjoyed life, because no one looked at her with disdain. She was beautifully dressed, and as soon as the brunette looked back, a polite smile blossomed on the servant's face. Her luxurious raven-colored hair shimmered in the sun, playing with soft reflections, and the skilled hands of the maid deftly created exquisite hairstyles from it. The carefully selected decorations, which were carefully brought into the room, amazed with their beauty and sophistication. And passing by the mirror Inés often stopped, was struck by her reflection. After all, in front of her stood not the ugly woman she was used to seeing. The neatly braided hair was elegantly placed to one side, and the canary-colored dress made of expensive fabric suited the girl surprisingly well. In just a few days she transformed from a shabby, inconspicuous girl into a real lady. And it all seemed incredible, almost like a fairy tale. Carefully throwing a wide stole of a deep green shade over Inés's shoulders, the maid admired the Duke's impeccable taste. But she couldn't believe what was said. The idea that the Archduke was personally choosing her outfits caused her both surprise and anxiety. But the very next moment, covering her mouth with her hand, the maid fell silent. After all, in the palace any careless word could cost too much. But trying to distract the frightened girl, Inés was interested in why this room was called Eleno. It really was her. After all, no room in the imperial palace had ever seen such a quantity of gifts, flowers, and various sweets. He completely transformed her into his beloved Eleno. With longing in her eyes, she dreamed of meeting the owner of this place at least once more. After all, after the Archduke brought her into this room, he never visited her again. And who was she, the girl thought? And why should he have reasons to visit her? His role as an escort ended that same day. Looking at the elegant rings like himself, the girl did not understand why he was sending gifts. If only the unfortunate beauty knew what game Ryan was trying to drag her into. The haunting thoughts wouldn't let go. She didn't know if it was okay to accept such gifts, and so she wanted to see the Archduke again to talk about it. In her idle hours, she thought about the Archduchy of Eleno and whether it was open to people like her. But most of all, the brunette was interested in what kind of person Ryan was. But the creature of darkness that appeared more and more often in her moments of melancholy told the girl not to trust anyone. The wise spirit, understanding how his donor lacked life experience, suggested that there is no good without a price. Everything will have to be paid for, and he suggested running away. Inés pushed away thoughts of this, realizing that she would have to leave this magical fairy tale of luxury and attention. She didn't want to lose such a new and wonderful part of her life. After all, she naively believed that she was rewarded for her suffering and injustice. After all, she dared to hope that perhaps there was another way out. But tears involuntarily flowed from her transparent and blue, like the sea, eyes. The girl, tormented by life, just wanted to be happy. To eat great food, wear beautiful clothes, and enjoy a new day. And apparently now all her dreams were destined to come true. The crown prince, opening the door to Inés's chambers, hurried to look at the results of his plan. Meanwhile, the maid, admiring her new dress and unusual headpiece, could not hold back her emotions. And indeed, this morning Inés was especially beautiful, as if she sensed the arrival of a guest, and her self-confidence grew with each passing day. Looking at the charming brunette, he assessed the silver dress, which perfectly matched her black hair and blue eyes. Pleasantly surprised, he praised the girl. After all, everything in her appearance, from her hairstyle to her dress, indicated that the changes had benefited her. In the light of the crystal chandeliers and luxurious furniture, he could not remain silent. It was truly beautiful, and the man was clearly satisfied with the work done. And Inés, noticing his attention, felt unexpected joy. Excitement spread like a light blush on the brunette's cheeks, and an elusive sparkle flashed in her eyes. She said that Perry had chosen him, and the blonde responded by emphasizing that her maid had excellent taste, and also asked if everything was okay with the girl. Sitting down at the table and looking at the cup with the drink, he was already waiting for an ode to his pride and intelligence, understanding what the girl could be thinking about all this time. But Inés was really happy. They treated her very well. She thanked him and blossomed, and she added, daringly and blushing, that she was very pleased with the Archduke's compliments. Revealing another side, she made Ryan think. His awakened interest was hard to miss, and the man's beautiful but so cold eyes suddenly became kinder. Emotionally waving his hands, he was glad that Inés was getting used to such luxury. And the girl, asking again what he meant, did not quite understand the hints. And without ceasing to blush, she said that her life had changed so much that she felt awkward. And moreover, she was afraid to get used to it. Holding a cup in his hands, he asked with interest what the girl did in her free time, and whether she was bored spending time in the room. But he had no idea how many years she had dreamed of being in such a state, the brunette said. And now Inez didn't know what to do to save all of this. The blonde closed his eyes and smiled slyly. That was what he wanted to hear. The gesture conveyed the confidence of a predator, pleased with his prey. Her expression barely changed. However, Inez felt her heart beat faster, as if she sensed something irreversible. Naive and vulnerable, she was already imperceptibly succumbing to his charms, rapidly approaching the trap that had been set with such subtlety. But suddenly his voice, sounding soft and almost affectionate, interrupted the girl's thoughts. After all, he had a gift that the man brought. Inez froze. She folded her hands on her dress, not knowing how to react. The excitement only increased, but curiosity got the better of her. And Ryan was already approaching her. Walking confidently but without haste, he maintained his usual restraint as always. Coming closer, he gently took her by the shoulders, asking her not to worry and not to turn around, as if he could sense her inner feminine curiosity. Looking at their joint reflection in the mirror, he surprisingly noted that he now liked what he saw. And the very next moment, an exquisite necklace of scattered pearls with a massive emerald pendant already adorned the girl's thin neck. A massive emerald pendant, like a drop of frozen spring foliage shimmering with deep shades of green, cooled Inez's skin. She forgot how to breathe. But it was nothing compared to the feeling of his fingers sliding down her neck, trying to fasten the jewelry. Looking at the girl, he thought about how easy it was to win a woman over. And he also reveled in his own genius. And now a necklace worthy of a queen adorned the graceful collarbones of the illegitimate girl. Blushing and turning pale, Inez struggled to control her emotions. Her heart was tossing between embarrassment, delight, and fear. While seducing the girl and moving towards his goal, he almost whispered that he liked Inez more and more. His hands touched the brunette's neck again. He understood that a little more and the girl would finally fall in love with him. But turning to him, she moved away, bombarding him with questions about the generosity with which the man treated her. She did not understand its nature. After all, he brought an illegitimate girl into his house, dressed her in beautiful clothes, and gave her precious gifts. Looking into her beautiful eyes, he realized that no one had ever shown her kindness. Otherwise, she would not constantly talk about it. But all he did for her this week was send his assistant for a gift. And then, sitting at his desk and propping his head up with his hands, he listened to a boring story about how he carefully chose a gift. And even when Ryan opened the box and took out a luxurious pearl necklace, not a single nerve twitched on his indifferent face. But continuing to look at the girl, the Archduke was once again convinced that those born out of wedlock, like his uncle, always thirst for love. And now he took her graceful hand in his. The impulses running from Inez were transmitted to the man. Leaning towards her face, he thought that he didn't have to do anything at all, because the prey itself was rushing towards him. The brunette blushed but did not move away again, despite the fact that she still had not received answers to her questions. Feeling her heart beating, he understood that Inez was nervous, which meant she was struggling with her feelings and emotions. He read her very easily. After all, being an emotionless person, he felt her feelings to the fullest extent. And every time Inez blinked her trembling eyelashes, the man saw her infinitely blue eyes, which had never seen such a cunning person. But suddenly he himself blushed, unexpectedly and completely uncharacteristic of a man who had seen things. Her sincere look, melting the ice, brought out tenderness. Wanting to kiss her beautiful lips, he wanted to see how the beauty's expression changed. It seemed that Ryan had no equal in the art of seduction. He also wanted to understand what her voice would be like after a long and passionate kiss from a man. Stepping back a little, he calmly asked her to repeat the question, as if he had not heard it the first time. Inez spoke again, trying to remain formal in her address, but suddenly froze. Something in his gaze made the girl stop. Taking advantage of the moment, he was already approaching her face. A light kiss burned her lips. Her breathing was ragged and her heart was beating wildly in her chest. Kissing slowly and with some languid tenderness, he could not tear himself away from Inez's lips. His hands, carefully stroking her back and clasping her waist, made her forget about everything. And the girl could not understand what was happening to her, because she was experiencing such sensations for the first time. And the warmth spreading through her body pleased the brunette. Of course she thought it was an impudent intrusion into her world, but she didn't mind it at all. When their lips finally parted, she took a sharp breath, as if she was just now realizing that she had been holding it this whole time. They didn't know what to say to each other. The shyness was holding them both back, forcing them to look away. But the girl didn't understand why he kissed her so suddenly. She had been told how to behave in such cases, but Inez thought that she did not want to ask him about it. She simply blushed without saying a word. But one strange question did not give her peace. She was worried whether all the aristocrats in Lycan were like the Archduke. After all, Inez was afraid that the Crown Prince would be completely different, and she hoped that the brothers had common character traits. But now she was worried about the fact that without meeting the Crown Prince, she was already kissing another man. After all, looking at his portrait in Geneva, she remembered that the man depicted in it made a pleasant impression on her. And now the girl was asking Ryan about when she could meet his brother. Not expecting such a question after a fiery kiss, the blonde thought about it. With his hands behind his back and his body leaning forward slightly, he indicated that Inez had brushed past him. Surprised that the girl was still interested in the Crown Prince, he suggested taking a walk in the garden the next day. After all, it was quite possible that the brunette would be able to meet him. Remembering the red-tiled pointed towers of the palace, she was already dreaming of a walk, and the Archduke was in a hurry to return to a polite tone. And now the elegant and at the same time so cold man was watching the girl again, and she did not know where to put her hands. His self-control amazed her. She looked down upset because she was partly jealous of Ryan. After all, no matter what he did, he never looked strange. She had long noticed how her intuition kicked in unusual situations, and now she was telling the girl not to be mistaken. Smiling, the beauty thanked the Archduke for telling her about it. After all, she realized that time was passing, and she had not yet done anything to fulfill the order. And he, looking down, said that he hoped that everything would work out for Inez. The man was surprised by the simpleton's cynicism. After all, Ryan believed that the girl was mocking him when, after the kiss, she immediately began to take an interest in his brother. Closing his eyes and holding his chin, he believed that he had made a mistake. Having unforgivably forgotten himself, he felt like an idiot, but his feelings didn't matter now. And if Inez was treated harshly again, Ryan thought, she would come running to him in tears. When saying goodbye, he asked the girl to tell him how the meeting with his brother would go. After all, he had already thought everything through to the smallest detail. However, lowering his eyes, the soulless man only dreamed of seeing tears on the beautiful face of the brunette. And the next day, Inez, following the instructions of her caring maid, was already carefully leaving the room, looking around. But now she was in a hurry to finally see the man destined to be her husband. Her yellow dress harmonized perfectly with the rich green foliage. The onlookers surrounding the brunette, watching from the side, recognized in her the woman who had recently been brought to court. But Inez didn't care about them at all. After all, they were as simple as the dress she had arrived in at the palace. Enjoying the fresh air and the singing of birds, she moved further and further into the park. Considering that all the conversations around her were the same, the brunette did not pay attention to them. She had long been accustomed to the fact that people despised her, and although she had never done anything bad to anyone, only by looking into a person's eyes did she understand what he thought of her. And only Archduke Eleanor was an exception. After all, he skillfully put a mask on his beautiful face. Raising her eyes to the sky, she thought that she still did not trust the Archduke. However, it was necessary to notice that when he appeared, the girl's heart beat faster. Holding her skirt, she couldn't help but wonder why the Archduke was trying to get closer to her. But not finding the answer to her question, she decided to simply enjoy the beauty of nature while waiting to meet the Crown Prince. Looking at the palace from behind the trees, Inez caught herself thinking that she was not at all accustomed to this majestic place, and she quietly rejoiced at this discovery. But suddenly her eyes went dark. A familiar chill ran down her spine, indicating that the messenger of darkness was nearby. Closing her eyes, the brunette was upset. Wrapping her fragile body, he was already in a hurry to tell his donor that if she really was planning an escape, then the time had come. She begged him not to be so insistent. But now, in the garden, in all his glory, he advised Inez not to be afraid. Kian was clearly not pleased, but looking into his eyes, she understood that the mysterious friend was serious, and she could trust only him. And he, sensing the danger threatening the girl, pushed her to flee, not giving her time for doubts. And Inez, before she could look back, was already running towards the thick bushes of the garden. She was so afraid that the beating of the brunette's heart drowned out the noise of the leaves. Her thoughts were confused, and the girl did not know what to do. Meanwhile, the crown prince, dressed in a simple shirt, was already looking for her in the thicket of trees. He had known these paths since childhood, and having walked them twice, he could not understand where the brunette had disappeared to. The anxiety was growing, but he could not explain it. Memories covering him returned him to the blooming garden of the Imperial Palace of Geneva. After all, there he first saw the beauty with blue eyes, but the girl did not see his crown prince, because he was covered by a rather thick mask. 8 years have passed since then, but Richard could not forget her eyes. Calling the knight, he ordered to strengthen security on the border, and if the girl with black hair crosses it, he asked to report to him immediately. However, the knight offered to bring her by force, but clenching his fists, Richard did not want to act using the methods of his heartless brother. Looking into the sky, he dreamed that Inez would cross the border unharmed. He understood that he was acting unbecomingly to the crown prince, but he could not do otherwise. And the news of Inez's escape caught the Archduke in his office. He froze in surprise. This situation was not in his plans at all. After all, considering the brunette weak and naive, he did not expect such actions from her. But he did not know about Cain. And the frightened maid, following the knight trying to find the words, was already reporting to the Archduke that the girl had not returned. Afraid to raise her head, she muttered that Ryan knew without her. In order not to scare Pei but to get rid of her, he asked to go and check again. Formally looking at the documents, he thought that Inez had nowhere to go, and judging by her helplessness, she simply got lost in the garden. But the maid raised her head and sobbed, saying that together with the court knights they had searched both the house and the garden. But even after several hours they could not find the brunette, Perry said, still worried. Well, suddenly, tearing himself away from the documents, he looked at the girl. Cold sweat ran down her back. The rustling paper made a sad sound. The man rose from the table, looked menacingly at Perry, and was already asking how Inez could have gotten lost. And the girl, throwing herself on her back and smelling the floor, was afraid to raise her head, realizing that anything could be expected from the Archduke. Opening her eyes for a minute, she thought that the brunette didn't know Lycan at all, and where she went remained a mystery. However, the Archduke, knowing that the Imperial Palace was well guarded, understood that Inez could not pass through the main gates unnoticed. But the man couldn't get her words out of his head. When she thanked him for the beautiful gifts and jewelry, but couldn't understand why he was kind to her. Resentment, like a toad, lurked in Ryan's soul and did not give him peace. The man did not understand what he had done wrong and how he had screwed up, quickly passing by the servants still lying on the floor, as if they did not exist at all. The Archduke left the office. However, under cover of night, he returned to the room where Inez had lived before. Standing on the red carpet, he looked around, but there was sadness in his eyes. The seasoned warrior was looking for the reason that made the girl leave, because nothing foreshadowed trouble. The board dress, which suited the brunette so well and remembered the man's kiss, lay sadly on the dressing table, waiting for its owner. He lowered his head and thought. After all, the reality was that the girl had taken nothing except the things she had arrived in at the palace, and Perry, who came up from behind, was surprised by how the dress in which the brunette went for a walk returned to the room, and the old one disappeared. The upset maid, who remained in the room after the girl left, did not understand how this happened. But she was even more surprised by the man who was pacing around the room. He was clearly not himself, because he kept repeating that she had left everything Ryan had given her. Approaching the chest with jewelry, he was already taking out the necklace that he had given her the day before. Standing in front of the mirror, he clutched the necklace in one hand, remembering how he fastened it on the girl's thin neck, and with the other he stroked her dress. The irritation that had flared up did not go away. No one had ever dared to reject his attention before. But she left without looking back, without thanking him, without appreciating him. Slender fingers tightened around the necklace. At that moment, the blonde realized that he didn't just want her back, he wanted to punish her. But suddenly sadness flashed in his eyes. Cruel fate constantly took away from him what Ryan desired, and even the worthless woman abandoned him. And now, giving the order to find the fugitive at any cost, the Archduke was not going to wait any longer. The loyal knight who was entrusted with the task knew that it was impossible to disobey. Having bowed, he was already hurrying to carry out the order, and before his eyes, again and again, appeared the huge blue eyes and tender lips that the man had kissed so passionately the day before. He couldn't help but wonder how a young girl could run away from a country where she knew no one, realizing that even if she disappeared without a trace, he would undoubtedly find her within 5 days. But continuing to search in all crowded places, the Archduke's men still did not achieve success. But the store, to which a neat cobblestone road led and in which the girl settled, could not be found even 7 months later. And Inez, a symbol of the temporary truce between the states, stomped along the cobblestones, confident that no one would find her. But after this incident, relations between the states rapidly deteriorated, and something had to be done to maintain the shaky peace. 3 months later, heading to Geneva, the crown prince was in a hurry to talk to the emperor. And it was not a bad decision. After all, the old agreement to end the war was coming to an end, and the emperor of the Lycan state understood that there was not enough strength to continue the war. And the request to find Inez was not to show Geneva's power. Most likely there was another reason. After all, it was confirmed that she was in Chiron. And although there was no reason to worry, the brunette could have health problems, Richard read in the reports. But it was better to check, the young man thought, because all these months he had been worried about the girl. He wanted to be sure that everything was okay with her. Looking sadly out the carriage window, he thought that it would be better if Inez disappeared somewhere across the sea, to the eastern continent. And the Archduke, sitting on the sofa in his office, understood that it was time to stop searching for the girl and take care of state affairs. 7 long, exhausting months of searching. He hoped that when he found the brunette, his condition would improve. No one had ever driven him crazy like this brash, untamable girl. She had struck a nerve and turned Ryan into an obsessive hunter. But there was already a knock on the door, and the knight, cautiously peering into the doorway, reported to the man sitting in the darkness that he had news. He listened in silence, but when the knight said that they had found the fugitive, the blonde stood up abruptly. Adjusting his cuff, he seemed ready to deliver a decisive blow. And the books laid out. The notebooks with recipes and the constantly smoking candles indicated that work in Robert's herbalist's shop went on both day and night. A blue-eyed brunette in a green sundress, looking at the man jokingly calling her a lady, who again told her that she needed to take care of herself. After all, she really did look sick. And the caring store owner was right, because he didn't know about Cain, who was taking away the last of the beauty's strength. She laughed. And what did she expect from a man who had been working with medicinal herbs for 50 years? Of course, Robert dreamed of curing her. But with curiosity, raising her nose and throwing back her hair, which often got in the way, she asked how much time she had left. The man who had been watching Inez for several months was surprised by her rare character. After all, there was no fear, no despair, no regret in the beauty's eyes. But while reassuring Robert, she said that she felt well and asked him not to worry. However, the man was not fooled, because he saw that Inez was underweight. And despite the fact that the girl ate well, her skin remained pale. When Robert found the brunette on the seashore, her heart was barely beating. And even after the treatment course, she could barely move, thus worrying the doctor. He often scolded her for neglecting treatment, because soon she might not get out of bed at all. But Inez only cried and remained silent. And then she quietly complained that she couldn't lie in bed for 6 months while life passed her by. And now, standing behind the counter opposite the man, the brunette said that she wanted to repay him with kindness for everything he had done for her. But the man clutched his head and was angry. It seemed that she had not listened to him at all. Now he did not understand what kind of payment was being discussed. He was absolutely aware of how sick the girl was and almost shouted at her. And Inez just looked at him with her huge eyes. He asked not to put pressure on him, because he advised her to take medication and rest more. And maybe then she would have 10 years to live. And Inez, looking tenderly into the doctor's eyes, was happy with the verdict. But she asked to give her at least some task. And the man, finally agreeing, asked to go to the mill. She was so happy that, creaking the door, she was already going out into the street. The sunlight, gently running across her face, stopped on her hair. She closed her eyes and became quiet, absorbing the energy sent by the world. The girl was glad that the small port town where she found herself was so far from the imperial palace. A pleasant breeze tousling her short hair helped her breathe. She thanked fate for the right choice, feeling that this was her place. The brunette, clutching a basket of fruit and berries, peered into the distance. And the sea, gently flirting with Inez, reminded her of the story of their acquaintance. Having made a difficult choice and paid for it with her health, the girl was still happy. After all, This place was inhabited by wonderful and kind people. But as soon as she thought that they didn't know who the girl was, black smoke was already enveloping her. Cain again reminded the beauty not to trust anyone. Only in this was her salvation. And she continued to believe him. She closed her eyes and understood that every kindness has its price. And even Robert helps for a reason. And now she knew that this was the best time in her modest life. And therefore she didn't want to change anything. And if she lives like this for the 10 years that Robert spoke about, then she will already be grateful to fate. The brunette had no idea that the air outside the palace walls could be so fresh and wonderful until she found herself here. And now, holding a basket of fruits and berries, she thought about how her life would have turned out if the girl had remained in the palace. Most likely she would have become the wife of the crown prince, the girl thought. But she had never seen this man, and her fantasies were clearly lacking. But the most terrible thing was to think that the girl could become the Archduke's lover, whose kisses she still remembered. Mentally addressing Richard, she said that she did not remember his face, much less his figure. But the young man was kind to her, and that was the main thing. But the brunette thought incessantly about the cold and secretive Ryan. Under the rustling of trees, she was already entering the city, dispersing empty thoughts as she went. After all, now she understood that only circumstances could change fate. But the rumble that came from near the bakery stopped her, and the girl sitting on the sidewalk covered herself from the blows. Not understanding what was happening, Inez was already rushing to ask the angry woman in the purple dress about it. And the lady said that the man was very angry because he raised someone else's child, taking it for his own. And now he was trying to figure out whose it was. Pointing his finger at his wife's face, he said that these illegitimate children were already on everyone's lips. And here she did the same as the one they were looking for. Having overheard the last words of the angry man, the girl shuddered. Turning to the woman, she asked again what they were talking about. And she, complaining that news was arriving in their town with a delay, already knew that the imperial family was looking for the illegitimate princess of Geneva. And not long ago, added the blonde in the purple dress, even Archduke Eleno asked for help from a neighboring kingdom in finding a runaway girl. Inez already felt how people's condemnation was washing over her from head to toe. She wanted to scream, but her strength was leaving the brunette, and the blonde man who arrived in the kingdom of Apple under cover of night, accompanied by a faithful knight, already knew where the fugitive was. He was angry that the girl ran away to another country, but Ryan was even more worried about the fact that his brother was deceiving him. Ever since he learned 6 months ago that one of the servants was reporting to the crown prince about Inez, he had become more secretive. And now, moving along the city square, the Archduke thought that it seemed his brother should have married her. After all, he saw feelings for the brunette in his eyes. He swore, pressing his lips together. He was unbearably torn apart by the feeling that comes from being constantly deceived. But he knew how to get rid of the thorns that caused unbearable pain. And now the man was heading to Chiron, because the time had come to look into the eyes of the one who dared to disturb his peace. And there was already a knock on the door. The knight who had peered into the doorway was in a hurry to report on how the order was being carried out. Bowing, he said that the knights sent to Chiron, with the help of leaflets scattered around the city, already had information about the fugitive. Meanwhile, Inez was rushing to help the lady who was sitting on the sidewalk and holding her bleeding cheek with her hand. She didn't know how to help, but she still had to ask something. When she asked about her health, the beautiful blonde looked up. The broken cheek was swelling rapidly, and pain was visible in her eyes. Inez, involuntarily retreating, was already trying on a similar situation, but all the woman could say was that she was fine. However, the brunette did not think so, and the girl standing next to her mother began to cry. The woman hugged the baby and calmed her down, and Inez suggested that they go to the herbal store, not thinking at all that she was doing the wrong thing. She remembered that she had already disturbed the man's peaceful life, but he had never complained, and so the solution came naturally. Helping the girl up, she thought about what she would say to the shop owner. After all, the reality was that the man had beaten his wife, who had become pregnant by Count Iger. But a familiar voice had already called out to the girl. An alarmed Robert, not understanding why the brunette had been gone for so long, went out to meet her. Seeing the beautiful flower bed of girls, the man smiled. However, his experienced eye did not miss the fact that one of them was injured. The brunette was glad that the circumstances were in her favor, and the kind man sees everything with his own eyes. But suddenly her gaze faded, because Robert had already started scolding her. Sometimes he cared so much about Inez that the girl felt like a child, By calling her immature, he was blaming her for making him nervous. After all, he deserved respect. And approaching the blonde, he took her arm, realizing that Inés could not support her on her own. On the way to the herbalist's shop, she told the lady that Mr. Robert was a wonderful doctor who would quickly get her back on her feet. And in a quiet voice, she asked the man to leave the girl for the night. After all, Inés was going to tell him a terrible story that happened at the market. But the wise doctor didn't need explanations. And despite the fact that they might be looking for the blonde, he was already offering his house for an overnight stay. After all, help had always come first for him, and everything else was completely unimportant. And now Robert asked the girls to go into the store quickly. He heard that a judge from Iran had been sent to accuse Inés of adultery with him, so the man asked him to hurry. And the blushing girl, frozen in place, could not believe his words. She understood that they would probably find her soon, and this made her afraid. And on the other side of the city, the Archduke covered his mouth with his hands and thought. He understood that if the connection between them was confirmed, Inés and Robert would be arrested, and the knight asked Ryan to act without delay. However, he was in no hurry. In the intercepted reports, he read that the girl was ill. Now he was angry with her again, because he had waited for this moment for so long, and now he could not take full advantage of it. But the knight insisted, and under his pressure the Archduke gave in. However, he wanted to go first, and at the same hour, taking out drugs and dressings from numerous boxes, Robert hurried to help the lady. Having come to her senses a little, the blonde hurried to thank the girl for her concern and help, and Inés was already thinking about the woman's difficult story. After all, she, working as a maid, caught the eye of the Viscount and became pregnant after the first night. Hugging the girl, she said that she could have been executed if she had mentioned that the child was illegitimate. Therefore, the blonde quickly moved out of the county. If only she knew how Inés understood her. Having gone through humiliation and condemnation, the girl sold in exchange for peace, once again experienced the flared emotions. But now the brunette advised the girl's mother to take a break from the terrible events, and she would take care of the baby for now. Sitting down on the bed and putting her hands on her knees, the woman thought. She could not imagine how to live on. After all, she had no such experience at all. And the blue-eyed beauty only occasionally glanced at her guest, entertaining the little girl. The woman was breathing quietly, but still decided to lie down. Her cheek was burning and thoughts were scurrying around in her head. But suddenly, turning her head towards Inés, the blonde quietly said that she had a look like the illegitimate children of a viscount. She didn't mean to offend the girl in any way, speaking in images and feelings. She just thought that she was too noble. Inés lowered her head and agreed. But she was not ready to talk about herself, realizing that getting closer on this basis would not end well. In the light of the night lamp, she asked forgiveness for her words, and thanked him again, because she understood that if it weren't for the meeting with the girl, they would have to spend the night on the street. But people who found themselves in the same circumstances understood each other without words. Opening Robert's travel suitcase, the brunette took out tweezers and a bandage. She understood that she could do little to help the girl, but she knew how to treat wounds. And without wasting time, she was already doing it under the new sounds of gratitude. Trying to calm the woman down, she asked her to sleep. And in the morning, the brunette promised. Together with the wise Robert, they would come up with a plan for further action. As she left the room, Inés stopped. She really wanted to help, but she knew that her options were extremely limited, and she couldn't rely on Robert's kindness either. After all, she felt that it was wrong towards the man, and he didn't owe anyone anything. However, she was now going down the stairs in search of the man. The girl knew that late at night he could only be in the laboratory, but as she walked along the parquet, the brunette already heard someone else's voice. Inés stopped and froze. After all, Robert was answering someone that there were no such people in his house. However, the person to whom these words were intended was sure that the store owner was lying, and he had verified information. She suddenly understood everything. Her aching heart sank. Through the gap in the wooden railings, she could already see a man dressed in uniform. No doubt she heard the judge, and now the man was saying that witnesses had seen a young woman bring a lady with a child into the house, threatening Robert. A man in a blue suit and with a thin mustache on his face threatened to search the house if he did not voluntarily hand over the baker's wife. Cautiously peeking out from her hiding place, the girl realized that Nea's husband had most likely contacted the police. She thought with longing that she couldn't leave the shelter, because she would give herself away. Her life was at stake now. But suddenly a child's voice called her. The girl who appeared from behind her was clearly afraid and tried to attract Inés's attention. Calming the baby, she asked to return to her mother. After all, the brunette could not leave this place without understanding how the conversation would end. But the girl, being persistent and grabbing the girl's skirt, did not want to return to her mother. The desire to protect this family pushed Inés to action. As she went down the stairs, she already saw Robert standing in front of the unknown man. She admitted that she had heard something from the conversation, and she decided that the men were talking about her. And now she asked the judge to ask her the questions that interested him. But as Inés came closer, she already understood that he was not alone. And the judge, recognizing her from the description of the witnesses, was already asking about the whereabouts of the woman with the child. Without taking her eyes off, the brunette was already saying that they were not in this house. However, the judge was already taking out his sword, threatening Robert. Making it up as she went, Inés calmly said that she had taken them to a hotel located on the square. Stepping forward a little and covering Robert, she offered to lead the men to the place where she had left them. She knew it was dangerous, but in an attempt to help the man who had given her shelter and love, she could not do otherwise. Turning and hugging Robert, she asked him not to worry. Planning to return by midnight, she asked him to go to bed. Inés, who was used to violent treatment, knew that she could cope, but the anxiety of a loving person could hinder her. And heading towards the door, the brunette was already trying to drag the uninvited guests, who were threatening the owner of the shop and their new guests, along with her. And the weather, as if foreseeing trouble, cried large drops of rain. The lightly dressed girl, afraid of getting wet, froze on the threshold. Without hesitation, moved forward. The confused man, silently watching Inés leave, suddenly realized that he heard the sound of rain. Knowing that hypothermia was equivalent to death for the brunette, he was already hurrying after her. Throwing open the door, he called for Inés, but the tons of water falling on the ground, drowning out his cry, killed his hope. Robert understood that he was not keeping up with his youth. Looking at the wall of rain, the doctor hoped that the brunette would survive after such an adventure. But he didn't know yet that another man had already responded to his call, who was many times more dangerous than the judge. And he, like a hunter, was already approaching his store. A handsome blonde man in a cloak to his heels, accompanied by a knight, was already asking about Inés. After all, he guessed that the owner of the shop was standing in front of him. Large drops of rain running down his silver hair, clouding his eyes, prevented him from seeing the man. But recalling the reports, he was sure that he had come to the right place. But the disappointment that awaited him at the threshold spoiled the Archduke's mood. After all, in this house there was no one he had been looking for so long. And the agitated Robert, not understanding who this man was and why he was so persistently interested in the brunette, asked her to leave his house. However, the old man's questions only irritated Ryan. After all, no one had the right to tell him what to do. Looking at the light in the second-floor window, he ordered the knight to search all the corners but find the fugitive. And Inés, squatting and leaning against the wall of the hotel, cried. After all, accompanying the men, she understood that she could not do without Kane. And the faithful friend, enveloping her in black smoke, was glad to help the donor. But the brunette barely had enough inner strength to live. And now, stroking her blue hands, she trembled from the cold pain and fear. After all, he was taking away her energy, even feeling that Inés was seriously ill. Closing her eyes, she knew she could endure it, because there was a lot to do. But the longer the brunette used the power of darkness, the faster she approached her death. And now, waving her hand, she asked Kane to influence the men, informing them that the mother and daughter had not been found. After all, he skillfully brainwashed, made them forget about everything. And now the men, not understanding why they were near the hotel, slowly went home. And the girl, breathing with difficulty and leaning against the wall, tried to get up from her place, but Kane worked hard. She only dreamed of getting home, but fate was already wedging itself into her measured life. Her heart beat in a strange and incomprehensible rhythm, drowning out the sound of the rain, and only the thought of Robert kept the girl on her feet. But the sound of the Archduke's heavy boots, confidently striding towards the brunette, left any hope of meeting a man in the past. Feeling weak, Inés still did not let fear hinder her movements. Trying to focus on the best moments of her life, she remembered Lickeny. But when a minute later she came face to face with the Archduke, she could not believe her eyes. Realizing that reality had caught up with her, she tried to make a quick decision. The alarm bell pounding in her head told her that she needed to run, but she had no strength. However, hoping for a miracle, she still made an attempt and headed in the opposite direction. But the man's calm voice was already stopping Inez, and now he was calling her to come with him. Realizing that there was no other way out and all she could do was follow her destiny, she turned and walked over. Looking through the streams of rain running down her hair, the girl quietly greeted Ryan, and he, forgetting about his anger, simply looked at her, realizing how bored he was. But Inez was already asking how he found her and why he needed her. The man saw no point in answering her questions. He simply looked at the exhausted body, hoping that the brunette would not fall in the middle of the street. The beauty lowered her head and fell silent, realizing that this strong and cold warrior man was completely different from the Archduke who was infatuated with her. Now he was suggesting that they go and talk in a quieter place, and he even took her hand. She froze, not understanding what would follow. Realizing that there was no one to protect her, Inez began to tremble. Her legs wouldn't obey her and she couldn't walk. She just silently begged to let her go. He knew and saw that she was sick. In a calm voice, the man asked her not to be nervous because he saw how the brunette was afraid. After all, he hadn't come all this way to hurt her, Ryan added. She couldn't believe her eyes as she looked into his. The dimly lit room in the guest house seemed too modest for a guest of such stature. Even the table covered with a tablecloth did not create a sense of coziness. Shielding Inez with his body, the Archduke beckoned the knight. He was a little nervous because he knew that the girl needed to be warmed up as quickly as possible. As he ordered the bath to be filled for the brunette, he felt his body shivering from the cold. The knight, with his head down and his hand pressed to his heart, was ready to immediately carry out Archduke Eleno's order. Pulling off his wet cloak as he walked, the man hurried. He felt he had to make it in time, otherwise it might be too late. And Inez, tensely watching the blonde's actions, did not understand what he was going to do. However, the man was already quickly approaching her. Now he understood more than ever that the success of his plan depended on the health of the beauty. Perhaps Ryan seemed harsh and unrestrained in desperately tearing the wet raincoat from the girl's shoulders, but everything was justified by the circumstances. The girl understood that she was unable to resist the man. Deep inside, she realized that he would do what he had planned anyway. But when he reached out to take off her dress, Inez quietly asked him not to do it, making it clear that she could handle it herself. However, hastily wiping her damp hair, he tried to warm the brunette. He knew how to act and did everything he could. Now he seemed calm, although anxiety was raging inside the man. He demanded that the girl simply stand and not move. His hands moved lower, wiping his arms and chest. He realized with pain in his chest how attractive she was at that moment, and Inez's body, responding to the man's touch, shuddered. After all, she had never felt anything like this. Dozens of questions requiring answers were already being born in his head, but now he did not understand why he was unable to take his eyes off this fragile girl. But there was one question that particularly haunted him. After all, he still could not understand how she managed to escape through difficult terrain. At that moment, Inez, even if she wanted to, could not answer him. After all, it was becoming increasingly difficult to breathe, and her voice was stuck somewhere deep inside. Taking a few breaths, the brunette tried to pull herself together, and Eleno continued to insist on an answer, trying to get everything at once. Squeezing her blue fingers, she was shaking from cold and fear. Her sick heart was beating so slowly that it seemed like the brunette was about to fall. Having gathered her courage, she nevertheless reported that escaping from Lickany was her personal decision. But he was least interested in the reasons. Right now he only wanted to hear how she managed to do it. However, the brunette knew that if she mentioned Kian, she would be considered crazy. Therefore, she only said that Ryan would never know the truth. Gently touching the girl's hair, he felt how much he missed her. But the man was sure that she would not be able to hide such an important fact. He looked at the beauty's tired face for a long time, and then slowly said that he was leaving. But there was discontent in his voice. Ryan was not one to give up so easily. After all, being a born warrior, he still remembered that he himself had suggested to the Emperor to deal with the lichen problem. But realizing that he had to use cunning, the man lowered his head and quietly asked if he had ever harmed her. And Inez had already assured that everything was different. Taking off his jacket, the man asked that in the future she should inform Ryan if anyone treated her rudely. Trying to restore justice, the beauty repeated again that everyone was friendly. She had no complaints about the courtiers. Looking intently at the girl, he again asked if the beauty was lying to him. After all, now he did not understand why Inez had betrayed him. Unbuttoning his shirt sleeves, Ryan reminded the brunette that he had shown her kindness and generosity. and she should be grateful. The tension between them thickened like a thundercloud. Inez's heart sank as she began to realize where this was all heading. The beauty kept her head down and remained silent, but the Archduke did not stop. In a dry voice, he reminded her that after everything Ryan had done for her, she had run away the next day. Although the girl was sure that she had fooled the servants. In fact, she had deceived him, the Archduke added. And now his olive-colored eyes piercing space looked deep into her. After all, he had already returned her to the royal garden, where the girl thanked him for bringing her to the warm chambers of the palace instead of the damp dungeon. Of course, Inez remembered the best days of her life, and she was very sorry that she had caused the Archduke pain, and pangs of conscience were already tormenting the beauty. But the next moment, the creature of darkness was already forcing the girl to wake up, and she shuddered, realizing that she had almost believed in the sweet lie. However, Inez did not want to remain silent any longer, and she already said that the Archduke wanted to use her. After all, this was what caused the wonderful attitude towards her. The Emperor could not allow the girl to become the crown princess, she added, and Ryan only helped him in the implementation of this insidious plan. With her head down, the girl bitterly noted that she was not as naive and stupid as they thought of her. Somewhere inside her there was resentment, and now her voice betrayed it. When she addressed him, she did not believe that the man would hear her, but Inez had to try. Realizing that she was starting to shake, the brunette in a trembling voice was already saying that she would not go back. Looking at the starry sky, Inez regretted that the Archduke felt deceived. Although she understood that her words meant absolutely nothing, but the man, interrupting the brunette, is already saying that words alone are not enough. After all, because of her escape and the terrible rumors, Lycaonie may find itself on the brink of disaster. And if a war starts because of Inez, then tens of thousands of innocent people will die like dogs, he added. But that wasn't the worst thing. After all, this time the heads of the Lycan royal family could be hanged on the castle walls, and so Ryan had no choice but to return Inez to the kingdom. However, she had already said that she had nothing to do with the Lycans. Feeling ashamed and not raising her eyes, she found the strength to resist. And the next moment, turning away from Ryan, she was already talking about how she had never even belonged to Genio. Nobody needed her. Everyone just used the girl, and even in Lycaonie she experienced hostile looks from the servants. She didn't want to sacrifice herself for all these people. After all, it was only after meeting Robert and moving into his house that she felt like a human being. Blushing and crying, Inez asked with pain and hope whether illegitimate children really do not have the right to happiness. Clutching her wet dress tightly, she felt that this was absolutely wrong. Knowing that now was not the time, Inez wanted to lift the curtain on her upbringing. After all, in Genio she was taught how to entertain and seduce men, and the revelations that the girl shared with Ryan were shocking. The Archduke tensed up. It was hard to believe, but he asked the girl again and again, trying to understand that everything he had heard was true. However, the brunette did not stop talking, saying that the bastard girl's fate was predetermined, and she could only become a prostitute. Without stopping crying, she said that she understood what her fate would be. But with a voice full of disgust and despair, Inez said that she did not want to live like that. However, the next moment, raising her beautiful blue eyes to the Archduke, she asked Ryan to let her go. But it seemed that the man was already thinking about something completely different. Perhaps the girl was pathetic and strange, but there was something about her that he couldn't take his eyes off of. Already knowing that she lived in a herbalist's shop, the man assumed that she would stay there. After all, Inez's health condition would not allow her to move on. The warrior's cold and calculating brain, working quickly and accurately, thought that the old man who was looking for the girl that evening would look after her and treat her. Putting aside Inez, he was now thinking about keeping her with him. After all, he already felt that he couldn't part with her so easily. But looking again at the beauty who was wiping away her tears, he suddenly said in a soft voice that he had heard her and understood everything. The brunette perked up. Looking at the Archduke with hope, she was already asking again how serious the man was. But the smile that appeared as it seemed to her, sincere, and the nod of the head in response instilled joy in her heart. However, a knock on the door was already distracting the young people from their conversation, disrupting the fragile moment of understanding. Inez shuddered, trying to find protection and intuitively press herself against the Archduke. However, the young man who stuck his head through the doorway was already saying that the bath was ready. Seeing the couple huddled close to each other, he hurried to apologize, because he saw that he had disrupted the conversation. Looking at them, the assistant already noted that the man was undoubtedly of noble origin, but the pale woman raised questions in him. The Archduke insisted that Inez take a bath, because she would not stop shivering. But the rain, loudly knocking on the windows, was already warning Inez of the approaching disaster. But now the filled bathtub, spreading steam, kindly invited the beauty to warm up and immerse herself in bliss. However, having sat down in it, the girl was not freed from doubts. Trying to relax, she could not order her brain to relax. Inez leaned her head on her hands and sighed heavily. After all, she was already doubting the correctness of her decisions. She remembered what Cain had said. Resting her head on the edge of the wooden bathtub, Inez closed her eyes. Trying to come up with an escape plan, she realized that she could no longer cope. Knowing that she had no more than 10 years left to live, the brunette did not want to run somewhere all the time. Her tired soul craved peace, not a constant race. Having asked the creature of darkness to join, she already wanted to analyze the current situation with him. After all, remembering the Archduke, she understood that he might be rude, but overall he was a good person. And perhaps she didn't need to waste years of her life running away from him. Now the brunette wanted more than anything to grab onto this hope and enjoy life again, trying to hide behind his huge back. But plunging her head into the water, she asked herself to come to her senses, because she had known the truth for a long time. And her heart told her that the place filled with peace was not near the Archduke at all. It was in the peaceful and warm port city of Giron. Only in the company of Robert, who loved and protected her like a fragile flower, could she be happy. Opening her mouth, she was already exhaling Cain. Thanking her friend for his help, she noted that his presence had been unbearably difficult for the girl lately. Splashing in the bathtub, she hoped that today was their last meeting. She so badly wanted Elena to let her go forever. The door opened. With her head down, she was already returning to the room where the Archduke was waiting for her. Gentle and sweet, with her hair still damp, she looked fragile, like a newly blossomed flower, enveloped in morning dew. And Ryan, sprawled in his chair, was already looking at the girl excitedly, practically not hiding his emotions. Inez was scared, but the man who wanted to win trust again was already smiling, and his olive eyes looked at Inez with curiosity, trying to penetrate into the very depths of her soul. The beauty, blushing from the piercing gaze, was already asking why the man stayed, and he, rising, quickly approached her. And now Ryan, trying to pull the game onto his field, was already offering to take the girl home. Extending his hand, he hoped that the girl would give him hers. However, Inez had no intention of doing so. The brunette assured that she could get there alone. She tried to look confident, but she felt herself shaking. Looking out the window, the Archduke thought about how to keep the girl, but only the rain and the late hour could be significant arguments. Extending his hand to the girl, he saw her haughty gaze and complete lack of interest in him, as if there was a motionless statue in front of him. But trying to raise her nose higher, she again thanked the man, hoping that he would satisfy her request. And even more than that, having bowed, Inez promised to remember this service for the rest of her life, and also to cherish the freedom given to her, the beauty added. But she didn't know the Archduke at all. After all, the man did not forgive those who rejected him. He was a vengeful man who did not tolerate disobedience. However, already rustling her dress, she headed towards the door, hoping that she could do this for now. Reaching out for the door handle, she was already pushing it, preparing to leave. After all, the desire to feel freedom with all her might was pushing the beauty. However, Ryan quickly reminded the brunette that if she needed help, the girl could come back here. This statement made Inez stop. The beauty turned around and looked at the man with fear. And now she was asking whether the Archduke really didn't need to go back. And he replied that having made such a long journey, he must now visit the capital of the kingdom. After all, being a military man, he had certain obligations. But Ryan touched his chin, saying that he had put in a lot of effort when he was looking for her, and now he didn't want to let Inez out of his sight. Speaking of the need to go, he hoped that the girl would be in a safe place. He promised to return earlier than 10 days. The brunette lowered her eyes and said that there was no need for that. After all, that was how she had decided. And although her voice was quiet, it sounded confident. But the next moment he was already showing her that she could be mistaken. After all, taking the girl by the hand, he was already turning her towards himself. The Archduke closed his eyes and kissed her hands. The electric current passing through her skin made its way to her heart, burning her from the inside. But a second later, he grabbed her and pulled her closer, tenderly and passionately kissing her neck and chest. Blushing, Inez begged the man not to do this. After all, the girl's will was trying to melt in his arms. But he, not letting go of the beauty and enjoying her closeness, only reminded her that in a few days he would return to hear her final decision. He stood so close that she could feel his breath. The man understood that a rare woman could refuse him, because he knew about all the methods of seduction. His gentle voice whispered in her ear to think it over while he was gone, and Inez, blushing, doubted her decision again. Trying to escape from the Archduke's embrace, she realized that it was not at all easy. The brunette tried not to remember what he had done for her. After all, she wanted to be free more than anything in the world, and she was already running away. A few minutes later, she was sitting in Robert's favorite shop, and the caring man, giving the girl a cup of hot tea, reproached her for such a long absence. The brunette, covered with a blanket, looked into such familiar and beloved eyes. Inez understood that only here would she experience true feelings. But Robert did not calm down. Continuing to scold the girl, he noted that a real storm was raging outside, and the beauty, knowing about her health, should not have gone out there. However, warming herself by the fireplace and holding a cup of aromatic tea in her hands, she enjoyed such comments. The old man approached and asked in a reserved manner what the brunette had told the judge. His voice was quiet, almost cautious, as if he knew in advance that he would hear something different from what he had hoped for. And the brunette, raising her beautiful eyes, already answered that everything would be fine for a while. The man smiled, but at the same time he was worried and was already asking if the girl had gotten into an unpleasant situation. After all, he immediately forgot to tell her that after leaving, some nobleman was looking for the girl, and the consequences of the meeting with him were already on Inez's neck. It was hard for her to lie to the man who cared so much about her. But now, looking down and wrapping herself tighter in the blanket, she answered that she was fine. Returning to work, the old man loudly tapped the pestle in the ceramic mortar, trying to calm not only her but himself as well, and the sad girl Inez quietly thanked him. After all, she understood that only this little old man was doing everything to make her life worthy. Concentrating on his work, he thought about his granddaughter, who died when she was the same age as Inez. After all, the girl reminded him of her so much. Looking at the neat rows of shelves with jars, the beauty understood that now she had a warm home and a person who cared about her. Reassuring herself, the brunette believed that there was no reason to dream of anything better, hoping that 10 days would pass as quickly and happily as the 6 months before meeting Ryan. However, after a few days, everything changed dramatically. After all, reading the brochures about the breaking of the peace agreement, as the Archduke predicted, she was horrified. People were panicking. Trying to figure out which state to join, they were plunging into chaos. However, the state of Lycan remained tense. Returning from the market, Inez had already heard that the illegitimate girl who had fled from the Jineo Empire was to blame for the event that had taken place. But the young man, like an actor on stage, calling on the crowd to gather in the square, had already announced the announcement. And people, continuing to gossip, were serious. After all, they believed that this rat was now hiding in the city. Unfolding the portrait of the fugitive, the envoy demanded that they begin searching for her, because this was the only way they could stop the war. In the portrait raised higher, Inez was already looking at the crowd as if she were alive, and the guy was already in a hurry to say that a similar girl had appeared in the city about 6 months ago. He insisted on grabbing her and dragging her to the police. Inez, who found herself in the epicenter of events, was already thinking with horror about what to do. Already feeling like a bird in a cage, she was rushing around in search of a way out. After all, the search for the girl, he added, would bring peace not only to Chiron but to all of Lycan. Realizing that the circle was narrowing and life would no longer be the same as before, she froze in place. And a random boy, tugging his mother by the hand, was already reporting that the woman depicted in the portrait was standing in front of him. Pointing his finger at the frightened Inez, he was already saying that the girl had the same black hair and blue eyes. His remark sounded like a sentence. However, Kane could not allow this. Trying to save the donor, he quickly blocked the boy's ability to see the brunette. And the next moment, realizing that the beauty was in real danger, he asked her to quickly leave the square. He reminded the brunette that she could use force to shut everyone up. Kane got angry, and she, clutching her head, made it clear to him that it was impossible. However, the power of darkness did not calm down. He insisted that Inez teach them a lesson once and for all. But, clutching her head, the brunette did not want to act in such ways. Leaning over, she was already screaming from hopelessness, begging to be left alone. Her voice reflected the pain and fatigue from the constant struggle. But Cain, grabbing the beauty with his powerful paws, was already carrying her to a safe place, trying to save her from imminent disaster. She hit her hand painfully on the cobblestones and knew she was safe. Her fingers were bleeding, but that was the least that could happen to her. The creature of darkness was angry. After all, lately he had to prove his rightness to his mistress more and more often. And now he advised the girl to run away again. But Inez cried and said that she could not leave Robert and wanted to return to the herb shop again. And she also begged Cain to go with her. After all, she knew that his existence was inextricably linked like a thin thread to Inez. The little girl living in Robert's house, looking out the window, already saw that something strange was happening outside. However, the old man, bandaging the beaten woman and looking at the girl, still did not understand what was going on. But the next moment, her eyes wide open, she was already screaming that a whole crowd of people were heading towards his house. Clenching her fists in fear, the little girl cried. After all, she thought that these people were coming for them. But the old man was sure that no one knew that they were living in his house. Looking at the woman, he ordered to lock the door and calm his daughter down, because her scream could give them away. Having placed the baby on her lap and hugged her tightly, she was already saying that she would do everything as the man said. However, if it was a policeman, the woman had already said, then she asked to turn them in. After all, she didn't want Robert and Inez to have problems because of them. But the old man, leaning on his stick, was already heading towards the doors. Saying that she was chatting too much, he groaned and got angry. However, the knocking on the heavy wooden door grew louder and more insistent, and the voices coming from behind it did not bode well. Without thinking about the troubles, he shouted out that already and complained that people were so impatient. However, a few minutes later, Inez was already entering that very door. With her head down, she already understood everything. It seemed that the girl could barely stand on her feet. Looking at the broken objects scattered across the floor, her eyes filled with tears. And the next moment the brunette was already running up the stairs. The fear that penetrated every cell of her body did not allow her to catch her breath. Opening the door upstairs, she could already see that in the room where children's laughter had recently been heard, a ringing silence reigned. The beauty stands frozen in place, realizing that the past will never let her go. After all, the life of an illegitimate child is predetermined by the stars. Covering her face with her hands, Inez began to cry. Bitter tears choked her. And with them came the understanding that her quiet life would remain only in memories. In the dimly lit prison, one of the guards was already asking another if the townspeople had found the black-haired girl. But the other, puzzled by the failure of the negotiations, only frowned. Speaking about the fact that news reaches Chiron late, he was surprised that this time everything happened immediately after the end of negotiations. However, his interlocutor explained that perhaps in wartime rumors and orders spread faster. But the men did not yet know that Kian had already heard their conversation. Trying to add something, the young man already felt the influence of the dark creature. After all, without realizing what was happening, he was fulfilling other people's desires. And the next moment, a trembling hand treacherously unclenches the ring with keys. And the young man, feeling inner danger, was nervous. Throwing a bunch of keys onto the tiles, the guy shouted that it was necessary to leave the building immediately. A minute later, the muffled footsteps of the guards' boots were already echoing across the stone slabs. Inez, who had appeared after them, was ready to act. But the cold of the dungeon increased the girl's growing tension. Quickly grabbing the keys and heading deeper into the prison, she was already running in search of the necessary cell. And the crying heard in the darkness, getting closer and closer, made Inez speed up. The air suddenly filled with blood and iron stopped the beauty. Closing her eyes, the brunette felt how it prevented her from breathing. Gradually getting used to the darkness, she tried to keep her cool. But the girl's sick heart trembled with fear. But suddenly a weak voice was heard behind the heavy lattice door. Opening the cell and going inside, the brunette already saw a woman with a child. Pressing the girl to herself, the blonde begged Inez to leave them. After all, this place was dangerous for her. However, the girl, as if she had not heard her, only apologized for coming too late. But the woman, continuing to persuade her, reminded her that the police were looking for her. But Inez seemed not to hear the blonde, only repeating that she was fine and had nowhere to go anyway. Trying to support her, the brunette smiled, even though she was afraid for both of them. But Kian, looking at the lonely moon outside the bars of the window, urged the girl to return to Robert's shop. And a few minutes later, Inez was sitting by the old man's bed, thinking only that she was the only one to blame for all his troubles. Thoughts were tearing him apart from the inside. The man was old, and after such injuries he might not survive. The brunette was shocked by the cruelty of the people who did this to him. Adjusting the blanket, the girl thought about how they used to come to his store more often than to the drugstore. Without taking her eyes off Robert, she regretted that he was too soft a person, and the girl should not have dragged the old man into this story. The blonde approached, gently touched her shoulder, and was already offering her some tea. But Inez was only interested in how it all happened. She said that at first ordinary townspeople came. When they questioned Robert, they realized that the brunette did not live with him. And then the royal army arrived, the woman added. And Inez shuddered. She suddenly understood everything. After all, Archduke Eleno had not abandoned his goals. Sitting down by the window, the brunette thought about it. And Cain was already complaining that lately he had to brainwash those around him more and more often. Inez barely heard him. Her thoughts were far away, focused only on how to save herself and Robert. After all, it was impossible to run forever. However, the little girl, tugging at Inez's dress, was already trying to attract attention. Looking seriously at the girl, she said that she was going to go with her mother to the police station. The brunette didn't understand yet why they wanted to do this, but the girl was in a hurry to explain. After all, they wanted Inez and Robert to have time to escape. Looking at the baby, Inez couldn't believe her ears. After all, the mother and child wanted to put the police on a false trail, and their selflessness touched her to tears. However, Inez had already reminded her that it was dangerous to do so. After all, they had to hide in a safe place. Without letting go of Inez's dress, the little girl assured that everything would be fine. Her childish spontaneity touched the brunette, and her natural courage delighted her. But already in the morning, a young man who appeared on the streets waving leaflets attracted the attention of passers-by. As they pasted them on the walls, the crowd of onlookers already knew that Genio's illegitimate daughter was turning herself into the police. The townspeople were pleased. After all, no one wanted war, and their assumptions that the girl lived with Robert were confirmed. Looking at the men who were leading Inez by the arms, people kept gossiping, comparing the girl to a wolf in sheep's clothing. Her downcast gaze indicated that the brunette was broken under the weight of circumstances. But there was one man in the crowd who had his eyes on her, and now he was planning how to wrest her from the clutches of the law, even if it meant crossing the line. Interrupting his thoughts, the knight standing behind him was already asking what they would do next. However, the Archduke, lowering his head, told him to remain silent for now. The man was confused and didn't understand Ryan. After all, he had been trying to find her all this time, and now he was ordering her to spread false information. Not understanding the blonde's actions, he knew only one thing, that they had gone too far in their search for her. And if the Archduke had simply called her name, everything would have been different. However, he did not miss the moment when Ryan was watching the brunette. Perhaps he wanted to hide something, the knight wondered. Turning to the Duke, he was already asking whether he should prepare to leave. His voice was cautious, as if he were treading on thin ice. But in response, he only heard one thing, that they needed to wait a couple more days. The actions of the Archduke were unclear, leaving room for guesswork. However, the young man, having grown bolder, was already reminding him that today was the 10th day. But Ryan, rudely interrupting, demanded that he shut up. With his head down, Lux was already asking for forgiveness. Returning to the hotel, the Archduke already understood how events would develop regarding the liberation of the brunette. And turning around, Ryan, in a completely calm tone, gave the order for the knight to break the wrist of the soldier who dared to touch the girl. Inez, moving towards the hotel, thought only about how long she would have to endure humiliation and live in constant hiding. Of course, the beauty remembered the offer that the Archduke had made to her, saying that he would return to Haran in 10 days. But now she needed to hide. Deep down, she already regretted not accepting him right away. After all, if she hadn't brushed him off, then maybe everything would have been different. But now she was standing in front of the door that was already familiar to her, trying to hide from pursuit. Walking towards the unknown, she was already stretching out her hand and opening the door. However, looking into the space, the brunette saw Ryan standing near the window. But it seemed that he was reacting to the girl. Inez was so taken aback that she was already addressing the Archduke in a voice trembling with tension. Turning around, the man realized that his plan had worked. It couldn't have been any other way. His eyes showed triumph and anticipation of victory. Not knowing where to start, she only said in a quiet voice that she was surprised that the man was here. However, looking into the frightened eyes of the beauty, Ryan was already saying that apparently he didn't need to leave, and the next moment the girl looked at the Archduke's face, trying to read his true intentions towards her, and he, blushing with anger, noted the wound on the girl's cheek. After all, knowing about her health, he asked her to be more careful. Slowly stretching out his hand, he gently touched Inez's cheek. Looking away, the brunette was embarrassed, and only a light blush flashing on her face betrayed her emotions. Realizing that freedom was no longer available to her, Inez began to cry, and now the tears that streamed from her beautiful eyes revealed what the girl could not express in words. Trying to be gentle and caring, the man asked how much her wound hurt. Looking around the modest room, she was already thinking about how tired she was. After all, Inez had come here to rest, and did not expect to see the Archduke. But pressing her hands to her chest, the brunette felt that she was safer with Ryan than with anyone else. But whether the girl could rely on him, she didn't know. And the Archduke, as if reading her thoughts, was already asking whether the girl was going to return to Genio. Anticipating her answer, he was already advising her to stay in Licheni. Inez no longer wanted to reject this temptation. Remembering the terrible treatment at home, kneeling down and bowing her head, she asked for guarantees. Looking at Ryan, she begged him to promise the man that if she chose Eleno, she would never regret it. Her eyes were filled with pleading, mixed with distrust. However, the Archduke had already asked Inez to remember how much effort he had spent for her. Realizing that he needed to press a little more, he wanted to appear convincing. But raising her eyes, she already reminded him that he had done everything only so that the brunette would become an archduchess, and not the wife of the crown prince. Trying to protect her interests, she angered Ryan. But in a voice that foreshadowed danger, he said that he could hurt her because nothing stopped him. But he did not choose barbaric ways to force her, and the brunette had to appreciate it. However, Inez did not believe in gratuitous kindness and had already said so. Looking at the beauty, Ryan hurried to ask about what the price would be for all his efforts. After all, his hidden desires burned inside him like a bright flame, giving him no peace. And the naive girl was already wondering if he really loved her. The blazing hope warmed her tired heart. But he was silent, and the girl already understood that it was not love but lust, and that was what pierced his heart. Bitter disappointment filled Inez's soul. He tried to answer something else, but it was unnecessary. Wanting to trample the man, she dreamed that he would call her name at the top of his voice. But the next moment, the Archduke was already talking about how she was provoking the man with her appearance. After all, everything about her drives Ryan crazy. Although in principle this should not have happened, the man thought. His desires were full of passion, bordering on madness. However, Inez believed that he should hate her. After all, she was the woman who was taught dirty things and sent to destroy his empire. The brunette shuddered because Ryan had already calmly said that it didn't matter. After all, she had never done this to anyone before. He knew that he would tame Inez, and only he would be satisfied by her as she had been taught. The man's confidence was frightening, as if he already owned her soul. Pressing the beauty tightly to his chest, he already asked her to forget about the war, and think only about how wonderfully she would live in his kingdom. Pressing herself against the man, the brunette understood that he was saying the words that Inez wanted to hear most of all. Hope flared up in her heart again. Holding her breath in the man's arms, she repeated over and over again that she wanted to live like a human being, because it was important to her. The brunette's voice trembled with pleading, but the next moment, tearing the beauty away from his chest, the Archduke already promised that she would be able to enjoy everything that she had never had before, and passionately kissing Inez, he quietly promised that if something did not change, then he would definitely change it. Now Ryan did not even doubt that the brunette had chosen him, and the stars, faithful companions of the moon gathered for the night ball, were already becoming silent witnesses of the great deception. The moonlight, making its way through the patterns of the latticed window and descending onto the bed, tried to eavesdrop on the quiet conversations of the strange couple. Feeling Ryan squeezing her hand in his large one, Inez asked him to take the girl and her mother with him. After all, it was important to her. But at that moment, it seemed that the Archduke did not listen to the beauty at all. Hugging her tightly, he slowly pulled her towards him, enveloping her in the warmth of his embrace. Anticipating pleasure, the man closed his eyes. But the girl did not calm down, asking whether he could love her, and whether she was capable of loving Ryan. Her naive questions irritated the Archduke. After all, in his world, feelings had long since given way to calculation and desires. And now the Archduke asked her to do what the girl had learned in Genio. Leaning closer and closer, he insisted that this was the love he had dreamed of all his life. And now, in the darkness of the room, pressing himself against her body, the man was in anticipation of pleasure. And the girl, closing her eyes, already allowed him to believe his words. After all, it seemed that perhaps such love should have been enough. And only 3 days later, Ines visited Robert again. All these days she did not forget about him, but she could not leave Ryan. However, her conscience did not give the girl peace. Sitting on the bench, they talked for a long time about what had happened. Robert understood that the girl would leave him, and at first he was even scared. But holding Ines's hand tightly and learning the details of the events, he realized that he was becoming calmer. The receding anxiety calmed the old man's soul. She wanted to take him with her, but she knew he wouldn't leave his homeland. And now she promised to take care of helping the man restore the herbal shop. And Robert can't imagine how he'll live without the brunette. After all, he's so used to the girl that he constantly thanks fate for such a gift. After a while, hugging the girl, the man asked her to write him letters, and also wished Ines a happy life. Hugging Robert, she understood that this wonderful man gave the beauty the happiest moments in her difficult life. But Cain was the most worried of all. His voice was wary, and he asked to think about everything again. Ines understood that there were many questions. However, there was nothing left to do but tell the being of power that the man had promised to love her. However, her loyal friend insisted that she should not trust anyone. But Ines really wanted her dreams to come true. After all, the struggle between her mind and heart was tearing her apart. Looking at the pendant that Ryan had returned to her one of those nights, she knew that she deserved to be happy, despite the fact that she was an illegitimate child. Remembering moments of intimacy, she thought that she didn't want to live like that anymore. She dreamed of living in a good place with good people, but the creature of darkness reminded him that there might be no more chance to escape. And she, putting the necklace on her neck, already accepted her new life and said that she understood everything perfectly well, but was still ready to take a risk. Leaving Robert's house, she had already told the Archduke that she was ready to go with him. Doubts tormented her soul, but the girl saw no other options. However, Ryan, realizing that he had carried out his plan, looked at the girl with satisfaction. Stretching out his hands, he was already ready to take the girl to a new life in which only he ruled. Beautiful autumn, painting the trees in its favorite colors and shades, came into its own. A year had already passed since Ines settled in Eleno. As he raised the cup to his mouth, the Archduke already heard complaints about him keeping an illegitimate child for himself. The majestic woman in luxurious attire did not understand why Ryan kept the brunette in Eleno, and he in turn did not understand why the lady was interfering in his personal life. Looking out the window, he was already looking for the girl with his eyes, realizing that she loved spending time in the garden. And indeed, in the light of the gentle autumn sun, he already saw Ines, who was moving with a book in her hands towards the swing. Remembering the previous night, he peered at the brunette's silhouette with undisguised longing, as if hoping to catch a reflection of that moment in her movements. Meanwhile, the lady, not hiding her impatience and speaking about the girl in a derogatory tone, pointed out that she did not like Ines's presence in the garden. However, the Archduke, admiring Ines's beautiful hair, had already said that the archduchesses always took care of the garden. And the next minute, completely relaxed, he asked the lady not to pay attention to her. However, the frowning blonde reminded Ryan that he had forgotten the will of her late brother. Ryan asked him not to say anything stupid. He remembered what his father had said about him not bringing illegitimate children to Eleno. But finishing his tea, the Archduke was already saying that it was too early to send the brunette away. After all, he could not part with the one who truly loved him, and the woman with a luxurious tiara on her head was already recalling the reports. After all, in them she learned that, returning from military campaigns, he immediately ran to Ines. Running her finger along the edge of the cup, the woman did not understand what her nephew saw in the skinny to the bone and not very pretty brunette. But Ryan, trying to end the conversation that was unpleasant for him, was already telling his aunt that everything has its time, and he asked her not to worry about trifles. However, the lady did not calm down, demanding clarification. But Ryan, who at that moment was admiring the brunette, who was sweetly looking at the birds, had no answer. And it couldn't have been, because when he returned home after difficult hikes, only her smile and tender heart warmed him, Ryan recalled. The brunette, slightly chilled, was already in a hurry to return to the mansion. However, something stopped her and the brunette returned to the garden. Sitting on the swing, she looked upset, because she understood that everyone in this house hated her. And even the servants, who were supposed to carry out all the orders of the Archduchess, ignored her. With her head down, Ines thought about telling the Archduke everything, because hiding the medicine and laughing behind her back was too much. Memories took her to the hotel where Eleno promised to give her a new life, and it would be significantly different from life in Geneva. With sadness in her eyes, she noted that nothing had changed. However, the girl remembered his promises and was going to talk to him about it. But her thoughts were already interrupted by a maid who, holding a broom in her hands, approached Ines. Being in a great mood, she was already asking what the Archduchess was doing here, because it was quite cool in the garden. But realizing that she was without a stole, the servants noted that the Archduchess could not walk down the street without covering her shoulders. All these laws and strict rules put pressure on Ines. However, the maid, supporting the brunette by the arm, was already saying that when Mrs. Kara was in the mansion, it was better for her not to go out into the garden at all. She had long since realized that her husband's house was a strange place, and the people there were insincere, those who skillfully adapted to the circumstances of a false world. After leaving the garden, Ines hurried back to her room. The wide staircase, like a decrepit old woman, creaked and sighed with every step. But as she climbed up it, she could already see the displeased face of Mrs. Kara and Ryan standing behind her. The tension hanging in the air made it hard for her to breathe, and the maid quietly warned that this would not be the best meeting and asked Ines not to worry. The girls bowed their heads and froze in a curtsy. The tension in the air foreshadowed a storm, but the respectable lady had already said that Ines was not well-mannered enough. After all, she doesn't know how to greet an adult at all, the woman added. But Ryan was already trying to come between them, believing that only he could tell his wife what to do. Leaning towards the girl, he quietly asked where she had been, although he knew it perfectly well. His words sounded like hidden concern, covered with displeasure. Clutching the book tightly, she was already preparing to answer. But her husband quickly interrupted the beauty. He was not pleased that Ines had been wandering around the streets all day. The Archduke's stern voice was filled with worry. She recalled such remarks, but she did not have the strength to sit in the room all the time. And besides, fresh air improved her health, she noted. But the husband said that there was a strong wind today, and therefore he did not want Ines to get sick. Therefore, he insisted that she quickly return to her room. Blushing slightly, she turned to the man and asked if he would come this evening. Her gaze showed timidity mixed with hope. Looking closely at the girl, he realized that he could not refuse her. Her defenselessness touched him to the depths of his soul, and the delicate wedding ring, which looked so graceful on her thin fingers, was a fragile symbol of their uncertain connection. He promised that he would come, especially since he himself wanted it madly. After all, his wife was like a breath of fresh air for him among all these lies that he himself invented. But the next moment he was already offering his hand to his aunt, saying that they should go. The woman was clearly unhappy that she was not allowed to mock the Archduchess. Her face was distorted with displeasure, turning into a bitter grimace. However, Ines had completely forgotten about this incident, and clutching the book tightly to her chest, was already thinking about the upcoming meeting with the man. Frozen in silence, the beautiful castle was once again falling into the power of darkness, and only the lonely moon, the companion of the lovers, constantly watched them. Beautiful moments of love always ended the same way. Because the man left, she understood that she would be left alone again, but it seemed that he didn't like it either. And lowering his head, he thought that he couldn't stay, because he understood that he was getting attached to her. Reaching for his shirt, Ryan heard her pleading voice asking him to stay. She had a way of doing it so piercingly that the words penetrated his soul. But looking at her, the Archduke understood that he was not ready to fulfill his wife's request, since he had already violated the established prohibitions. Looking at her husband, she remembered that in moments of intimacy, Ryan did not hold back his emotions, and Ines liked it. But then he returned to his cocoon. And despite the fact that they were already connected by feelings that the man wanted to hide, they never once greeted the morning or fell asleep in the same bed. Touching his beautiful body with her small and tender hands, she asked him to stay a little longer. Looking at the man with bottomless eyes, Ines wanted to ask a question that had long lived in her heart, but had not yet dared to become a sound. Now she wanted to remind them of Rani, the girl they had taken from Chiron. She knew that the little girl had been abused by the servants, but he cared little because he was focused on Inez. Her scent was driving the man crazy, and the desire to possess her, enveloping his consciousness, prevented him from thinking. Holding his wife close, he felt himself getting excited. After all, if she wanted Ronnie to be her personal maid, he added, all she had to do was tell the manager. Pulling the robe off the girl's shoulders, he already heard that she was saying something about walks. But without giving it any importance, he tried to involve her in the world of pleasure and bliss. Drowning out all sounds, he was already closing the brunette's mouth with a kiss. But for a moment she froze and fell silent, but was already hurrying to ask her husband for a favor again. Having slightly moved away from the man, she was already talking about the fact that the most important thing a person can enjoy is freedom. Leaning over the beauty, the Archduke did not understand what Inez was talking about. His gaze showed bewilderment mixed with irritation. However, her dreams were already there, behind the fence of a beautiful but cold mansion, and now she asked for permission to leave it. Ryan was visibly shocked. After all, the first thought that entered the Archduke's head was the alarming guess that his wife had run away. But of course the girl didn't want that. She just wanted to see life beyond it. It seemed to her that the desire was so simple but still unattainable. At that moment, the man's anxiety reached its peak. But looking at her with his grass-colored eyes, he forbade her to do so, citing the fact that the doctor was against long walks. But when he came closer again, he promised that he would allow Inez to go out when spring came. But for now, he thought it was safest to remain in his domain. But slightly pushing her husband away, the beauty was already saying that this place was not as safe as the man thought. There was anxiety in her voice, and he already felt it. Turning his wife's upset face, Ryan asked what was wrong. It seemed that at that moment the Archduke could kill anyone for the brunette. But she had already told about the servants' attitude towards her, about rumors and their unwillingness to carry out her orders. Old grievances having burst out, now did not give Inez any peace. Ryan was surprised. He never thought that such things could happen in his house. However, Inez had already said that they didn't even notice her, as if the girl didn't exist. Her voice trembled with humiliation. Recalling all the cases, the brunette noted that it would be nice if the servants answered her questions. After all, Inez wanted to be noticed. And remembering her husband's assistant, the beauty added that some of them even try to hide the brunette's medications. Now she stated, with restraint but firmness, that over the course of a year she had noticed that the behavior of the servants in Eleno was not much different from what it was in Geneo. Ryan promised to sort it out. The man knew that all it would take was a simple order to stop them from treating her like that. However, kissing the girl again and again, he asked not to say that this could serve as a reason for her to leave him. The moonlight, penetrating through the huge windows, softly illuminated the lonely chairs and empty cups left after evening tea. Trying to fall asleep, the beauty remembered how the day before, sitting under the crowns of golden trees, she read a poem about love. The tender lines made their way to her heart, leaving an indelible mark. Closing her eyes, she enjoyed how the poet compared love to a timid spring flower and a warm wind. She was especially struck by those moments when he wrote that a great feeling is beautiful and wonderful, but sometimes this still does not prevent it from being delightful. The depth of those words resonated in her soul. And now, lying in bed, she thought about how she felt about Ryan. And he, realizing that he did not want to leave, felt resistance growing inside. But suddenly Inez understood everything, and she was already quietly telling her husband how she loved him. Buttoning the cuffs of his shirt, the man turned around and looked at his wife in bewilderment. His heart sank because no one had ever said such words to him. However, sitting up in bed and looking at the surprised Archduke, she repeated these words again. And it seemed that at that moment the girl was truly happy, and he already understood that he was worried in vain, feeling that he could relax. After all, he understood that she would never run away from him. Trying to consolidate the victory, he already reminded that they would go outside the mansion together. But next spring, words filled with hope penetrated Inez's soul. The brunette laughed and thanked her husband for hearing her requests, and she hoped that he loved her as much as she did, but was embarrassed to admit it. The weather changed so quickly that soon the first fluffy snow began to fall softly on the leaves outside the window. Inez was embroidering. The brunette was in an unusually good mood, and despite the fact that her husband had briefly left the mansion, no one ignored her or hid her medications. She found herself thinking about spring more and more often. After all, Ryan's promise constantly warmed her. Remembering how her ward had settled in, she was happy because the little girl had fallen into the caring hands of a kind red-haired maid. It was still difficult with Mrs. Kara, but Inez noticed that she was paying less and less attention to her and was not driving her into a corner as before. And Ryan's assistant, thoughtfully offering her to drink herbal tea at least once a week, assured her that the decoction would restore her strength. And indeed, Inez began to feel her body slowly but surely coming back to life. Inez understood that she had learned a lot during the winter. After all, she began to embroider more often and study the language of the Lycan Empire more diligently. For some reason, it seemed to her that if she tried and became at least a little bit like these people, then the brunette could become a part of this place. But she met Ryan less and less often. After all, he disappeared into his office, immersed in his work. She saw that something was happening, but she did not understand what. Not much time had passed since the temporary truce with Genio. The Empire was still weak, and new threats were beginning to flare up on all sides, especially from the east, where the Dorcan barbarians increasingly looked at the borders with undisguised interest. Ryan tried to stop the impending conflict by constantly corresponding. However, he saw that nothing was bringing results. Discussing the topic of war with the elderly lady, he had already reported that he would have to go to the negotiations in person. Holding her breath, she listened to her nephew and only became more upset. Her heart sank that the Archduke would have to go to the battlefield again. Trying to calm the lady down, Ryan said it wouldn't take long. The Archduke promised to come at least once every 6 months. And the gray-haired lady, who had retained the remnants of her former beauty, looked at her nephew with pride. After all, she had always believed in him. But Ryan, drumming his fingers on the table, was thinking only about who to leave the instructions to regarding his wife. He knew the character of the aunt he was leaving to manage the affairs in his absence. Not wanting to spoil the mood of the only woman who remained family to him, he decided to entrust Inez to an assistant. As he was getting ready for the journey, he told his aunt that the delegation from Geneva, headed by Crown Prince Richard, had already returned. But they had failed in the negotiations. The woman was surprised at how warmly Ryan spoke of his brother. But the Archduke had already asked to contact him if a matter requiring an immediate solution arose. The lady agreed, but in her heart she hoped for only one thing, that Ryan would return as soon as possible. But it was difficult to promise him anything, and now, looking down, the blonde thought about his wife. And the saddest thing was that the Archduke was already missing her, even before he had time to leave the house. But saying goodbye to Inez was the hardest thing of all. It seemed that the already fragile woman suddenly became invisible. After all, she did not understand how she would live without him, and what worried her most was not the separation itself, but the possible danger associated with the war. The girl's heart told her that she could remain a widow. Without looking up, he tried to console the brunette, and he said that he planned to finish everything quickly. Seeing Inez's anxiety and despair, he sighed heavily and mentally reproached himself for not warning his wife in advance. But looking up, she was already thanking God that everything really ended quickly, and Ryan returned home. But then suddenly his wife asked when he would return. This was the most difficult question, and although the Archduke already knew the answer, there was uncertainty in his voice. But the next moment he said that he would return in the summer. Inez's eyes dimmed. With difficulty holding back tears, the brunette already understood that now her main dream was collapsing. He saw that his wife wanted to say something, but her words were confused and stuck in her throat. However, she was already quietly whispering that spring was coming soon. Squeezing her fingers, the brunette was already saying that she would like to go outside alone without an escort. Ryan froze. He had completely forgotten about his promise, and now his face reflected horror because the Archduke was most afraid of losing his wife. As he hugged his wife, the Archduke heard her say that in the spring, behind the fence of the mansion, unseen flowers bloom, and she would like to see this. Ryan didn't know what to answer yet. In an attempt to find arguments, he stroked his wife and stalled for time. But the very next moment, lifting her off the floor with a playful grin, he asked her if she still didn't like his mansion. The man wanted so much to kiss the flushed brunette, but she calmly answered that it was not about the house. She had simply dreamed about it all winter. Making it up on the fly, he already promised that in a couple of years they would go together to the Rhine Valley. But the beauty must wait for her husband. Her eyes dimmed, and he, holding the brunette by the chin, already saw how the girl was suffering, not even trying to hide it. The Archduke really hoped that Inez would wait for him, and he repeated this out loud. trying to get through to his wife. Saying goodbye to her was much harder for the man than he thought. After all, feelings were tearing him apart from the inside. The man did not expect that it was possible to experience separation so acutely. Quickly heading towards the door, he heard his wife trying to say something last. But turning around, the Archduke saw the girl handing him a handkerchief with clover embroidered by her own hands. But Ryan already understood that her sweet gift was unlikely to help him on the battlefield. And she, raising her bottomless blue eyes to her husband and pressing her hands to her chest, was already quietly talking about how she loved him. Inez begged her husband to return unharmed. And now there was sincere faith in the wife's voice. But he was already in a hurry. Painfully aware that he would not see his wife anytime soon, he was clearly upset. However, before leaving, he had already ordered the knight to keep an eye on Inez, and especially to make sure that the girl did not leave the mansion. Handing over a handkerchief with embroidered clovers, the Archduke asked that it be taken to the office and placed in a drawer of the desk. Time dragged on slowly, but 2 months later Richard arrived at the mansion. It was noticeable that the stately blonde man in a snow-white waistcoat was in an excellent mood. Sitting down at the table, he thanked his aunt for the invitation. After all, he had often thought about finally visiting Eleno, but the lady only smiled reservedly. The Crown Prince thanked her for the warm welcome and hurried to inquire how long his brother had gone on campaign. But she, not knowing what to answer, only let it slip that Ryan always had a lot to do. Smiling, he noted that a new painting had appeared on the top landing. It immediately caught the attention of the Crown Prince, because the magnificent waterfall cascaded into a huge lake, reflecting a rainbow in the sunlight. But she, without raising her eyes, calmly replied that the Archduchess often receives gifts, the origin of some of which she does not even suspect. Closing his eyes, the Crown Prince understood without further ado whose gift he was seeing. After all, only a professional could paint the picture, and only at his brother's request. Without expressing his thoughts out loud, he only smiled contentedly and cautiously remarked that the Duchess must be bored without Ryan. But I had already heard how my aunt, calling Inez a child, complained that she was still busy getting used to the new place and had been doing so for many years. However, the Crown Prince said thoughtfully that more than a year had already passed, and he still had not seen the Archduchess in society. Looking at the tea set, he assumed that perhaps she would find time for a cup of tea with him. After all, the girl was his brother's wife, and he wanted to chat. And the gray-haired lady, not hiding her irritation, already replied that she did not consider it necessary to waste time on a girl who was not ready to go out into society. Moreover, the lady noted, the brunette was not unfamiliar with etiquette and had a poor command of the Lycan language, and the Duke forbade the girl to leave the mansion. But the young man, pretending to ignore his aunt's refusal, with a slight smile asked to have lunch with her and the Duchess. Looking at him through Ryan's eyes, she just pursed her lips and thought about it. She didn't like the idea. And since all responsibility for the internal affairs of the kingdom now lay on her, she was quite cautious. But she could not refuse her nephew. Moreover, while walking through the garden, he had already accidentally bumped into a beautiful brunette and she made a pleasant impression on him. Kissing the girl's hand, he tried to examine her more closely. Noting her pretty features, the man introduced himself as Richard Rishvaligo, and she, blushing and not knowing what to answer, carefully examined the unusually gallant blonde. Slightly confused, she did not dare to enter into conversation. Inez was visibly nervous when she received the invitation to dinner. She had difficulty using the cutlery and often apologized. The young man, smiling slightly, corrected the brunette, and also gently said that if you hold the knife incorrectly, you can hurt your hand. He carefully touched her hand to adjust the position of the knife and fork, and did it with such tact that the girl did not feel embarrassed. But Inez was still worried. She was even afraid to touch the food. However, in her thoughts she increasingly noted that Richard was surprisingly kind. After lunch, they strolled through the park, and the Crown Prince was quick to remark on how magnificent the Eleno mansion looked at any time of year. The girl, as if waking up from a dream, raised her head and for the first time in a long time looked closely at the monumental building. It was truly beautiful, and only now did she realize that she had looked at her feet too often, forgetting about the beauty that surrounded her. Richard, as if wanting to tear the girl out of these thoughts, was already asking how the brunette was living in Ryan's house. Smiling, she admitted that last year had been difficult, but she hastened to add that her husband had done everything to make her feel at peace now. Then, without holding back, she spoke of how she was looking forward to autumn. After all, when Ryan returned, she would ask his permission to leave the walls of the mansion. The blonde, remembering the conversation with his aunt, recalled that the girl could not leave here without the Duke's permission. But under the quiet murmur of the fountain, instilling courage in her, Richard asked why she absolutely needed this permission. Wasn't she free? It seemed that thoughts fluttered in her head like butterflies in a meadow. But she knew that she could not change anything. After all, she had promised her husband that she would wait for him. And yet the beauty was not discouraged. Smiling, she said that she believed that Ryan would make her dream come true. Sitting down next to the girl on a bench, the crown prince dared to ask if she loved her husband. Not expecting such a question, she, looking into the distance, answered that she loved. After all, one of the greats wrote that love is the 4 seasons, and she always waited for one season to come and replace another. But Richard saw that the girl was sad. Looking down and blushing, she now thought that this was of course love. After all, her cheeks were burning, revealing embarrassment and deep feelings. And Richard, glancing at the coffee table, had already noticed the open book of poems. He quietly asked where she got it. As it turned out, a kind person had sent her a collection. But for the crown prince, everything was clear without further ado. The feelings hidden between the lines were too obvious. Listening to her read the poem she had chosen, he felt heat rising to his ears. The tone of these lines was too frank. Sensing his confusion, Ines laughed softly and said that he was an amazing man. There was such sincerity in her voice that the crown prince shuddered. He looked at the girl in surprise, not understanding how she had managed to form an opinion of him so quickly. He was slightly confused, but did not object. But the brunette had already noted how easy it was for her to be around him. After all, the opportunity to talk to a new, and even a good person, was a real rarity within these walls. And Richard admitted that he enjoyed communicating with the unusual. Touched by the shadow of loneliness, Ines. From then on, he began to visit his brother's estate more often, and each visit brought him new impressions. He even taught Ines to write letters. And autumn, which seemed so far away, came suddenly, and the men's boots, covered in road dust and traces of gunpowder, now reminded us that their owner had returned from the battlefield. And the voices of the servants already confirmed this. And Ryan, looking at the mansion, tried to see the one he missed madly. It was still quite warm in the greenhouse, and the autumn wind, looking inside, walked between the glass walls and flowers. Hearing the servants' cries, Ines was already turning her head towards the fence, and the crown prince understood that the pleasant meetings had come to an end. But she had already seen Eleno's flags rising in the distance, and they did indeed confirm the return of the Archduke. She quickly got up and tried to make out her familiar face, while Richard, standing in the shade of the greenhouse, noticeably grew thin and became upset. However, the Archduke, quickly walking around the park, was already approaching the glass building where he once loved to spend time. His eyes looked longingly at his wife, but he also noticed that his brother was next to her. Running up to her husband, she spoke excitedly about how glad she was that he had returned, and Ines's voice trembled from the overwhelming emotion. But she immediately noticed his upset look, perhaps because there was a person standing nearby who was preventing her from enjoying the moment. And Richard, unable to look away, watched the lovers who seemed to still have feelings for each other. Ryan's tender eyes looked at his wife carefully. He called his wife by name and couldn't stop looking at his beloved face. By breaking the rules of etiquette, the man understood that even next to his brother, he could no longer restrain his feelings and desires. However, Richard, breaking the tense silence, hurried to greet his brother and asked if he had not noticed his presence. But Ryan not only didn't see him, he didn't even hear him. He slowly pulled Ines towards him and enveloped her in the warmth of his embrace. Gently touching the brunette's lips, he kissed her greedily and insatiably, enjoying her aroma. The world went silent, giving way to the lovers, and Richard couldn't believe what he was seeing. He had no idea that his brother was capable of such passionate and sincere emotions. But Ryan, holding his wife tightly, held her as if he was afraid of losing her again. And Ines seemed to have stopped breathing. Covering her mouth with her hands, she was afraid of suffocating from the happiness that had suddenly swallowed the girl up completely. However, Richard tried to speak again. When he said that he had not expected his brother to be so passionate about his own wife, he was clearly not lying. Breaking away from Ines for a moment, but continuing to hug the girl tightly, he asked for forgiveness for not immediately reacting to him. He quietly explained that he had not seen his wife for 2 years, and the crown prince should have understood him. However, he was surprised by Richard's presence in Eleno. After all, He thought that his aunt only turned to him for advice through letters. But the man's gaze had already fallen on the tile-inlaid table and the open book. But his wife, who pressed herself tenderly against him, distracted him from his stupid thoughts with her living and loving presence. Raising her eyes to the Archduke, she wondered why he had not warned her of his return, even with a short letter, and he answered with a quiet smile that he had just arrived. But he was already interested in what Inez was doing in the old greenhouse. But the girl replied that she had spoken with the Crown Prince and was writing a letter to Robert. She had been so carried away by the conversation, she added, that she knew nothing of her husband's return. But now she wondered why the man was so interested in this circumstance. Ryan didn't seem to hear her words and was already asking how long his wife had been outside. A little confused, she said that she had gone out after lunch. The man lowered his eyes and assumed that he had perhaps interrupted their good time. But Inez, holding out her hands to her husband, asked him not to think so. However, the Crown Prince, with his hands in his pockets, looking at what was happening from the side, saw his brother's discontent and jealousy. Having decided not to interfere, he already said that he was going to leave. After all, he knew that when his brother was angry, it was better not to mess with him. But Inez, who had turned around, was already asking the Crown Prince to stay for a few more days. At that moment, she didn't even think about how her husband would react to this. However, Ryan, squeezing her shoulders tightly, showed that he did not like his wife's request and such attention to their guest. But turning the girl towards himself, he was already addressing Richard. He was not against his presence and would even like to discuss several important points with him. And the Crown Prince, realizing that in such a delicate situation it might be unnecessary, promised to think about it. And a minute later he agreed to stay, considering the fact that he had been invited. The beautiful dining room, decorated with red candles and crystal candelabra, was inviting for dinner. When telling about the battle with the Darkins, the Archduke did not hide that it was more difficult than he thought. Slowly devouring the food, it was obvious that he was exhausted and needed rest. The Crown Prince supported him and raised his glass to wish him health. He said that his brother had worked hard and deserved recognition. However, he hastened to add that during his absence he had managed to correct the draft budget of the duchy, and very much hoped to discuss this with Ryan as soon as he recovered. But the Archduke was already wondering whether this was unnecessary trouble for his brother. However, he assured him that it was the opposite, because he always loved working with numbers. The seemingly formal conversation led Inez to think that the talk about good relations between the brothers was too exaggerated. However, the aunt, wiping her lips with a napkin, looked clearly displeased. Without hiding her irritation, she was already thinking about how to get rid of the Crown Prince. And the next moment, looking at her nephew, she was already suggesting that they pay a visit to her brother Camille. The Crown Prince, realizing that he was unable to refuse his aunt, had already replied that he would be happy to keep her company. After all, he had not seen his distant relative for a long time. Turning to his brother, the blonde asked with interest whether this trip would be the Archduchess's first exit outside the mansion in a long time. However, Ryan had already said that Inez did not have to go. In turn, he asked his wife to pretend that she had not heard the Crown Prince's proposal. However, the gray-haired lady supporting her nephew believed that Camille would hardly be happy to meet an illegitimate child. But Richard was not going to stop. Continuing the topic, he reminded that Inez was the wife of the Archduke, and therefore all the conventions were irrelevant. He asked his brother not to interfere in his family without his request, and a tired Ryan was already saying that this was Elena's business. The silence that followed didn't bode well, but it seemed like everyone present finally felt like Ryan had come home, and the blonde, realizing that he had gone too far, was already agreeing with his brother, accepting the fact that the Archduke would figure everything out himself. As they said goodbye in the hall, he realized that there were unsaid things between them that they could only discuss in private. But Ryan wanted most of all to stay with Inez. He was tired and missed his wife and wanted to put everything aside. But at the same time, he thanked him for his support and participation in the affairs of the duchy, as well as for taking care of his aunt and Inez while he was not around. And it even seemed that for a moment the old kinship and mutual gratitude flashed in their eyes. After all, the Crown Prince was not only a brother to Ryan, but also his closest friend since childhood. They had a lot in common. They grew up close and shared their dreams. But interrupting her husband's reverie, Inez was already asking whether the Archduke was hiding something important from her. Ryan assured her that everything was fine. But as they moved through the corridors of the mansion, She was already asking about where the men were going next week. With her arms folded and a melancholy voice in her voice, the brunette said that she did not want to part with her husband, because he had just returned. However, Ryan replied that the trip concerned Eleno's affairs. But he hurried to say that they would return in a week. Her gaze showed resentment, because the brunette did not understand why she could not accompany her husband. But Ryan couldn't tell her the truth. After all, before his death, his father had made him promise not to have illegitimate children, and not to allow the family to be disgraced. Feelings of bitterness and duty fought in his heart. But as he embraced his wife, he understood the inevitability of the gap between desires and duties. Stroking Inez, the man was already trying to relax. After all, he had been waiting for this moment, and now he hoped that he would soon throw off the burden of fatigue and tension in her arms. But suddenly the man stopped, felt someone's presence. Quietly asking if the crown prince had left the palace, he felt a chill run down his spine. Turning around, they peered into the darkness. After all, they again felt that they were being watched. However, the next moment, Ryan abruptly grabbed his wife and sat her down on the balustrade of the terrace. Feeling the wind touching her hair, the girl froze. Inez hurried to tell her husband that she was very scared, but it seemed that her voice, trembling with fear, only increased her husband's desires. But the Archduke only spoke of her holding on to him. The sound of confidence could have calmed the girl down, but she did not like what was happening at all. Hugging the beauty, he covered her body with kisses. And the girl, trying to survive in a personal fight with the height, only repeated that someone was looking at them. But the men's quick hands were already unbuttoning the dress. Erzgerog asked them not to pay attention to the rustling, because he did not want to worry about propriety. Ryan's desire was so strong that she could already feel his hot breath and warm body. But the next moment he called his wife to be honest. Having moved away from her a little, her husband was already asking about what she had done while he was away. The torments of jealousy, tearing him apart, were burning from within, causing pain and pleasure to the fragile body of the beauty. He really wanted to know how she lived and what she thought about. However, Inez could not understand what he was talking about. After all, the girl was faithful, both in thoughts and in actions, and the memories already transported the Archduke to that evening when he first saw her at the ball. Being in a wonderful mood, she was glowing with happiness. But Ryan remembered not that, but how the smiling girl asked about the name of the man in the white mask under which the crown prince was hiding. However, now, on the open terrace, Inez already wanted to cry. After all, the brunette had imagined the meeting with her husband completely differently, but the interrogation was just beginning. Continuing the torture with heights, the man was already asking about what the girl had written in the letter she had sent to Robert. Perhaps she wanted to leave this place, Ryan wondered. But Inez only said that she was waiting for him. After all, he had promised to take his wife to the valley she had dreamed of so much. Without letting go of the brunette, he covered her body with kisses. She was so scared that bitter tears were already flowing down her face. The man saw that the girl was afraid. However, he insisted that she should depend on him and look only at him, thinking that after all, it was he who had met her first at the ball. He had no intention of sharing her with Richard. This thought did not give him peace, burning everything inside. Having lowered the girl from the balustrade, the blonde man was already saying that he forbade her from meeting with the crown prince. Inez was upset. After all, her life was rather boring. But next to the crown prince, she felt alive, because he knew how to listen and never judged. But the very next moment, the Archduke clarified that if such meetings were to take place, they should take place in his presence, but not alone. The beauty promised that she would do everything as her husband wanted, and he kissed her again and again, because he loved her more than anything in the world. However, the next morning, when she opened her eyes, she thought that she had gone crazy. After all, everything that had happened the day before still terrified her. Her body ached, and the girl understood why. Because they were making love in such a dangerous place and she was in constant tension. However, the words of love flying across the terrace warmed the beauty's soul. Inez caught every word, as if she was afraid that the wind would carry them away forever. And now, remembering this, the girl blushed. But the thought that came to her that she needed to take a bath distracted her a little. Reaching for the rope, she was already tugging at it. But the servants were in no hurry to come to her aid, and the ominous silence did not bode well. Repeating the movements, she looked towards the door in surprise. Misunderstanding gave way to anxiety. Without thinking twice, Inez was already leaving her room in search of a servant. But the quiet whispers flying around the mansion were already catching up with the brunette. This was not surprising, because the servants were already discussing yesterday evening, and not at all skimping on disgusting expressions and words. And in the hall, foreshadowing changes, the servants hastily removed a painting from the wall, clearly following the Archduke's orders. The mansion had turned into a buzzing hive, frightening the Archduchess, and what reached her ears was disgusting. Making up legends on the fly, they said that Inez had become the Crown Prince's mistress, and this lie was already spreading like a spider's web. She had become a rumor, and she had already heard that Eleno's people were gossiping about how Inez had first seduced the Archduke and then tried to seduce the Crown Prince. Considering her already low origin, they considered the brunette a witch, and they were sure that the girl was born to seduce men. Trying to escape from these terrible rumors, she did not know what to do. But the girl already understood that it was Ryan who had a hand in this. In desperation, she ran into her husband's office wanting to talk to him, but it was empty. However, hearing sounds outside the window, she quickly approached him, and what the girl saw did not please her at all. Her aching heart was squeezed with disappointment and hopelessness. After all, the assembled courtiers and the horse-drawn carriage only testified to the fact that everyone was leaving the mansion, leaving her alone. But the next moment, the Crown Prince was already in her field of vision, looking longingly at the windows of the mansion. However, turning around quickly, he was already getting into the carriage. His disappearing silhouette gradually left a feeling of loss in the beauty's heart, and Inez, clinging to the glass, was already thinking that he had most likely already heard the dirty gossip. But now she was more upset by the fact that they would not see each other again. With longing, seeing off the man who helped her while away those 2 difficult years without her husband, she said goodbye to him. But when she left the office, she already noticed that the desk drawer was open. Curiosity seized the girl. Looking inside, she saw the stationery that Ryan used for writing letters. But the very next moment, her gaze was drawn to the scarf that she had embroidered especially for him. And on the eve of his departure, she had asked him to take it with him. However, soon the girl realized that he had been lying there for so long that he was even covered in dust. This meant only one thing, that the Archduke did not take him with him. And the brunette tried in vain, trying to put a bit of love into her work. Returning to the bedroom, she was already in a hurry to talk to Perry, who had finally entered her room. And now she asked the girl whether Eleno's servant had really seen her as the Archduke's mistress all this time. But as she thought about it, the brunette was already remembering what she had been doing for 2 years in Eleno. However, the only thing that came to her mind was that she spent most of her time pleasing Ryan in Eleno's luxurious mansion. The girl's gaze sank. After all, these weren't even rumors but the pure truth. And now she didn't even doubt that Perry thought the same about her. But the frightened maid only looked at her in confusion. And there were reasons for that. After all, she had something for the Archduchess. Handing over the envelope, she was already saying that when the Crown Prince left, he asked her to give this to her. However, the girl was very afraid that Ryan would find out about her actions. Taking the envelope from the maid's hands, she froze for a moment. Her thin fingers squeezed the paper, and anticipation slowly spread through her body. Taking out the letter, she already recognized Richard's handwriting. In it, he asked her to write him letters about anything and whenever she wanted. He would wait for them from her. The girl lowered her head and sighed heavily, because she understood that her friendship with Richard was already over. Anxiety gripped Inez's heart. Sitting on the bed, she realized that she was now completely under her husband's control. But suddenly she remembered how many letters she had written to her husband, with words of love and tenderness. But he never answered her, and she knew that the letters had been delivered. The growing resentment demanded an outlet. The girl did not regret anything, because she had no doubt that she had chosen the right path. The beauty sincerely loved the Archduke and still considered him a good man. However, now looking out the window, she already doubted that she would be happy in this house. Sunlight streamed through the windows and fell on Inez's clenched fist. The beauty was nervous, trying to find an answer to the obvious question. But the coming understanding, tearing the brunette away from her unfulfilled dream, already gave a clear answer. She asked Perry to let her know as soon as the Archduke returned to the mansion. But he never came, and the girl was in a state of agonizing anticipation. Taking the maid by the hands, she asked her to confess where her husband had gone, because she understood that everyone knew about it except her. However, she only knew that he had gone to Rica, and would most likely return next week or the week after that, Perry added. Without letting the servant go, she complained that it was hard for her to wait for him in this house, but the girl asked to remain calm, saying that Inez had no choice. With her eyes downcast, the brunette had already given herself 3 days, and if he didn't come, the Archduchess would begin to act, despite the fact that she was forbidden to leave the mansion. Now Inez didn't know that the 3rd week of September was a tragedy in Eleno. After all, it was connected with bloody events. The Archduke left the mansion on purpose at this time. After all, if he closed his eyes, then all the deceased would appear to him in his sleep one by one, and these nightmares would not give the man any peace. Waking up in the middle of the night, he could not find a place for himself. Knowing that in the past he became a murderer, he carried a heavy burden. After all, Ryan was too young when the irreparable happened, and the Archduke did not realize the consequences of his actions. The warm autumn rain, sprinkling the lonely grave, seemed to mourn his uncle along with him, and the memories that seemed so distant were already surfacing in his memory. The white flower meant for the deceased was a reminder that he was a bright person, and that was how Ryan remembered him. Standing in front of the grave of a close relative, he noted that it was raining heavily again this year. The disgusting weather, repeating itself every year, suggested that the heavens were mourning the deceased on the day of his death. After all, Uncle Million played a huge role in the life of the Archduke. He was an excellent swordsman and orator and knew how to create a calm atmosphere. And despite the fact that he was an illegitimate child born to a prostitute, the Archduke had no reason to avoid him. Ryan truly loved him with his childish heart, and often spent time on his lap. And now the man noted that these were the best memories of childhood. However, as a child, he did not understand why he could not be invited to dinner, and why he always heard refusals and was alone. But smiling Uncle Million explained to his nephew that his sister and brother were not very happy to see him. But this did not prevent the man from maintaining a great mood, and the boy did not understand why his relatives did not like him. Calming him down, the uncle told him that when his grandfather was alive, everything was different. But sometimes the uncle regretted that he was born at all. After all, he complained that having received extra love from his grandfather, he became more greedy. Remembering this, Ryan only thought that if he had not ignored his uncle's words and passed them on to his father, then perhaps his parents would not have met such a death, and the teenager wouldn't have to deal with his uncle with his own hands. Dying at Ryan's hand, he told his nephew not to be too upset. After all, he was the only one who truly loved him. And now, looking at his uncle's grave, the Archduke again regretted what he had done, understanding only how skillfully he had been used during that period. After all, the teenager became an unwitting instrument of retribution in the hands of adults, condemning himself to endless suffering. Gripping the hilt of the sword tightly, he could already see his hands turning blue from pain. But this pain was incomparable to the pain in his heart. But what happened next completely killed Ryan's mood. After all, Inez, dressed in a black dress, was already hurrying towards him. Not expecting to see an uninvited guest, the Archduke looked at the brunette with condemnation. And the girl was already in a hurry to ask what this place was, because she had found it with difficulty. In the stream of incessant rain, the brunette stretched out her hands to the Archduke, trying to share his sadness. But he abruptly pushed the girl away, saying that she shouldn't have come to this place. Ryan was angry. He didn't understand how his wife knew about this place and dared to come here. Quickly heading to the guest house, he hurried to leave the cemetery, as if escaping from invisible ghosts. He pulled her by the hand so fast that the girl's feet barely obediently stepped on the wet ground. She was gasping from pain and fatigue, begging him to stop. But turning around abruptly, the man was already asking whether his words were really just empty words for the brunette. The girl was trembling, but with her arms folded across her chest, she asked Ryan why she had to ask permission every time for something, since she was the same person as her husband. The man couldn't believe his ears. But the next moment Inez was already declaring that from now on she would decide for herself where to go. Looking at her husband, who was amazed by her courage, she added that her silence had not previously been a sign of consent. After all, she had only sat in his house because she believed him. Looking around the strange room full of dust and foreign objects, she quietly explained that she had come to clarify something, because it was important to her. But Ryan didn't even want to look at the girl. He wasn't ready to feel her power yet. However, curiosity was stronger. Frowning, the man asked what exactly she wanted to know and why she had come here in such disgusting weather. And she spoke directly about the fact that he had promised her a trip. And the girl already understood that her husband was not going to fulfill his promise. Breaking into a scream, she said that the servants called her a mistress, and she was sure that her husband knew about it. And his aunt, despising the brunette, treats her mercilessly. But the most painful thing was that the Archduke himself contributed to the fact that Eleno's people spread rumors about her. After all, he made love to her in front of others. His actions only proved, Ines continued, that for him she was nothing, just a pathetic creature. He didn't care how she lived and what she felt. After all, knowing her situation, she understood that her husband could ruin her life. But he swore that everything would change. Now the brunette understood that everything the Archduke had said and promised at the beginning turned out to be a lie. Barely holding back her tears, Ines demanded answers to her questions. After all, she wanted to hear an excuse from her husband. However, the Archduke knew that everything his wife said was true. But the man was angry that an illegitimate child was making such claims against him. Now he spoke coldly as if he were a stranger. He accused his wife of useless actions that, according to him, destroyed everything. He almost growled. However, Ines did not understand what was being discussed, and she tried to find at least a little meaning in his gaze, but there was only fatigue and irritation. Clenching her fists, she felt her voice trembling. And now the brunette was declaring that she would never have come to Eleno, knowing that he would treat her like that. But quickly approaching his wife, he was already clutching his face with his hands. Did Ines really think she was human? The man asked. Trying to calm down, he hoarsely asked whether it was really not enough for his wife to have a roof over her head, tasty food, and beautiful clothes. Trying to understand why she couldn't just be grateful and not demand more, he continued to squeeze the brunette's face. Unable to withstand the tension and his gaze, the beauty was already struggling with the incoming tears. But the next moment, they were already flowing like a river down her beautiful face. But the girl's tears disarmed Ryan. Having let go of the beauty, he was already wiping them away with his hand. And Ines understood that he didn't love her anymore. The brunette felt how everything she believed in was collapsing. Closing her eyes, she simply sobbed loudly. Realizing that he had gone too far, Ryan was already postponing his return to the Archduchy, and even the approaching military expedition to Darken. After spending 2 weeks with Ines in a cozy guest house, he thawed in body and soul. And the girl already noticed that when she cried, the man seemed to become softer. They slept together despite the nightmares that plagued Ryan, and she always found the strength to hug and comfort her husband. Not wanting to clutter my head, I simply enjoyed the moments of happiness. However, at some point the beauty felt weak, and now she regretted that she had used Kane's power. Sensing something was wrong, Ryan already saw that something was wrong. After all, he always knew about his wife's fragile health. He felt the heat when he brought his palm to her forehead. But Ines quietly tried to calm him down, saying that it would soon pass. But Ryan wasn't going to wait. He was already picking her up and running to the bathroom, not wanting to waste a moment. He undressed his wife with such tender care that she felt goosebumps. He was so gentle, as if another person had temporarily moved into him. Realizing that his wife was too weak and had a fever, he, without thinking, sat down in the bath with her. Feeling the fragile creature in his arms, Ryan whispered that the brunette should always remain so sweet and gentle. The Archduke promised that he would throw the whole world at her feet if she did not irritate him and knew her place. After all, only with her did Ryan feel happy.